He wished this dream would end and introduced himself as Konohara Jin. He noticed that, to top it all off, a snowstorm had started. He remembered how his sister constantly lectured him under the guise of fairness. She'd urge him to eat sweets, but he'd refuse, and she'd ask if their aunt's efforts had been in vain. The hero offered to let her eat the sweets herself, to which she became angry and told him not to be so picky. He thought that's just how his sister is. He thought the sweets were tasteless, and his sister was even trying to force him to eat them. She had no intention of eating them herself. The young man reflected that she always forced others to do her work, using justice as an excuse. That's why he no longer wanted to live with her. In the car, he asked how much longer the drive would be. His sister told him to shut up and sit still. When they arrived, he thought how tiring it had been. His sister called his name while he was checking their things. She asked which bag contained the sake, adding that it was the heaviest. She wondered if he could definitely lift it, and he thought it would be better if he carried it alone. If he could handle it in the car, he could handle it here too. He decided that as soon as he entered a university in another prefecture, he would be free of this infection. The young man suddenly found himself in the forest and wondered where the car was. After all, he had just been in the parking lot. He wondered if he was dreaming all this. He wondered where everyone had gone, since they were heading out to camp. He tried to calm down, but discovered there was no signal on his phone. He decided that if he went down the mountain, he'd be able to see the city. He reached the sea and was surprised, not understanding what was happening. He had walked for so long, but hadn't encountered any city or people. The young man was glad he'd brought a refrigerator. He had enough food and drinks for 4 people. He thought he needed to get ready for the night, and doubted he'd make it before sunset. He also noted that the beach was completely litter-free, and he was glad he'd brought his knife. He thought it was because of his sister that he had to go to that fireworks show. He remembered his friend inviting him camping and regretted putting off watching the survival show. It would have been a good opportunity to escape his sister. He was tired, but still couldn't get the fire going. He realized he had to hurry, as it would soon be dark. Lying in his sleeping bag, he thought about how tired he was. He hoped that as soon as he woke up, this whole dream would come to an end. When he decided to go the other way in hopes of seeing the city, he complained of being bitten by insects and thought he'd need to gather some branches for a fire later. He reached the sea again and realized he was on an island. He wondered where he would sail to, even if he could build a boat. And he wondered why this had happened to him. He'd simply decided to go with his sister to a fireworks show he didn't even want to see. He thought he needed to quickly gather some branches. Then he wondered why he needed them at all, and remembered it was to keep the fire going. The young man saw something beautiful and was surprised. He thought that there was something like that on this island. He found a stream and was glad to see water so close. Hoping someone had noticed the smoke from the fire, he decided to gather some branches and head back. The hero decided he needed to build himself a proper shelter. He wondered if the structure would be stable, or if it would be better to reinforce everything with stone and dirt. He heard a noise during the night and thought it was a boar or a hare. He realized he couldn't delay strengthening the walls and wanted to wash himself. He ate the fish and thought how tasteless it was. He really wanted salt. He realized he would soon run out of water and decided to slowly sip from the spring. He also decided that tomorrow he would try to fortify the house. The young man thought the leaf roof looked good. He decided to make small windows using plastic bags, as it was a bit dark inside. He dug a drain to keep out the rain and found a rock. He realized it could be used as a heater if heated first. The hero thought about using the hole he'd dug for a bath. He decided that even though it was small, it would be enough. Jin decided he'd had enough of fried crabs and fish. He needed to think of something else. He noticed that the leaves were starting to turn yellow. He was glad to take a bath, but he wondered if it had gotten too cold. He was glad he had a small pot. Now he could eat stewed food too, giving him more choice. The hero thought his shelter, while not ideal, was quite acceptable. But before he could do anything, snow began to fall, gradually covering the mountain. He found some mushrooms and wondered if they were edible. But then he decided it would be better to hurry home. He felt cold and realized that soon the entire island would be covered in snow. He thought he wouldn't be able to fish so easily anymore and wondered what he should do now. He wondered with despair if he was really destined to die like this, all alone. Suddenly, he heard a voice that said this wasn't his world. The voice explained that it had accidentally summoned him along with the hero. A voice from the ball of light said he had accidentally fallen under the hero's summons. He was now in another world. Jin screamed in panic, not understanding what was being said. The voice explained that he had been transported there just before his death. He wondered in despair where the hell he had ended up. He was indignant at how anyone could say such a thing, expecting faith. He assumed the speaker was some kind of spirit. The ball of light replied that it was not just a spirit, but a former deity whose energy had been drained after the summoning. The purpose of the summoning was to momentarily connect the two worlds, and any living being was suitable for this purpose. The deity explained that his world was being saved from extreme materialization, while this world was being saved from extreme spiritualization. 3 people were needed to perform the summoning, just before their death in another world. Jin realized that since there were 3 of them, his sister Haruka had become a hero. The deity confirmed this, and he too was on the brink of death. Another voice said it didn't matter anymore. The ball of light begged him to wait. The woman said that they would deal with him later, but first they would listen to his wishes. The orb deity assumed that Rin's failure had drained more energy into the connection, so the summoning's scope expanded. The old woman asked whom he would choose, and the woman added that now was not the time. The genie and the deity argued over whose fault it was. The woman explained that since he couldn't return home, he would be given the opportunity to choose a patron deity. Usually, it would be the summoning deity. She introduced herself as Vaughn, a specialist in strength, fire, destruction, and regeneration. She added that patronage grants strength, skills, and helps one settle in. Others also introduced themselves. Ludere with the power of earth and silence, Kadar with the power of plants and order, and Ish with the power of water and healing. Pal earth and harvest, Mishto, light, wind, love, and desires, and Halera light, love, and beauty also offered their powers. The orb god said that Rin specialized in ice and darkness, but had lost much of his power and was on the verge of extinction. Jin ordered the orb of light to shut up. Jin asked if his power would be restored, but the gods replied that everything has a beginning and an end. They said they were simply strong enough to be called that. Jin, confused, asked if it was possible to choose everyone. The gods explained that his lifespan would not be sufficient, and their powers conflicted. Furthermore, they were not close enough to compromise. Mishto explained how charisma manifests itself in different gods. For her, it manifests as love. For Pal, it manifests as friendship. And for Halera, it manifests as obsession. Kadar advised him to think about what he wanted to do in this world. He said they would help him choose the right skills. Jin replied that he wanted to live comfortably. He didn't want to be tied down by unnecessary ties. He added that he needed power to travel the world freely. Kadar asked if he would like to interact with the hero. The ball of light declared that he had chosen Haruka because she was good and worked hard. Kadar asked Jin if he was trying to protect her, as their power increased when a person used their gifts. Jin realized in horror that his sister had also gained powers. In a panic, he asked the ball of light what it had given her. The ball replied that it had given her full magic and dominance. Jin thought he definitely shouldn't have anything to do with her now. Kadar listed the skills Jin would gain, including freedom, bond break, and hero killer. He gave Jin a sword, saying he couldn't live without it in this world. He added that the blade could cut through most materials. Wang gave him a pouch that would travel with him. She explained that it could be used to speed up plant growth. Jin thanked them for everything, and Kadar said they should be thanking him. Jin asked if he could take the puppy with him. Van replied that Rin had become blind and had lost his powers, so he couldn't offer anything but himself. Wang said it was their parting gift, a comfortable and safe home. She warned him to be careful, as their abilities might not be compatible. Jin thought he wanted a place where he could live comfortably. He saw a beautiful landscape and a house that looked more like a mansion. He noted that it was warm there, although it should have been winter. He thought his new face was a symbiosis of those 3 young gods. He felt as if he were their son. He entered the house and discovered a storehouse that would never run dry. The pantry was full of food, from rice and vegetables to various meats. He thought it was like a dream. He found a barrel of fish and wondered if it was a portal to Japan. After the meager rations on the island, he couldn't bear to look at such abundance. He decided to take a bath first and then eat. He sank into the bath with pleasure, wondering when the last time he'd washed properly had been. He wondered what he'd make for dinner and what his skills were like. The genie found a water wheel and realized it could be used to polish rice. He was delighted to now know how to use it. He looked at the sleeping puppy and thought that it had become his protector. He hoped that the puppy would be able to recover with his strength. The young man decided to cook steak with cabbage, even though it was an odd combination. However, he smelled fish and crab. He savored the food, noting how beautifully the salt and pepper paired with the fresh rice. It was heavenly delight for him. Lying in bed, he thought he'd left the fire in the stove, but he was too lazy to get up. He decided not to check the locks, doubting anyone would break in. He wondered if he would really live here, in this unknown world. The bed felt too soft, and he couldn't sleep. He explained that a week had passed since his move, and all he'd done was eat and sleep. The healing skill had healed his body, but it hadn't alleviated the accumulated fatigue. He thought life on the island had worn him out more than he'd imagined. He was glad to finally finish the laundry. Jin reflected that his menu was limited to what he'd tried before, and that it was a good excuse to travel. He decided to make ramen with mackerel and seaweed. He realized he needed more flour, but had nowhere to store it. Remembering the map and the money from the gods, he decided to go to the market. The hero wondered where he should go, looking at the world map he had received. He used the teleport skill for the first time. He thought, so this is what it looks like. The young man found himself in the border town of Kanum, located near the demon forest. He realized he could earn money here by defeating monsters and become stronger. He paid the entrance fee, showing his free knight's ID. He decided to register with the Adventurers Guild to avoid paying fees in the future. He decided to buy new clothes so as not to stand out due to his newness. After the purchase, he was satisfied and decided to continue shopping. He looked at the bag of money the gods had given him and thought it was quite a large sum. He guessed his sister had probably received the same. Jin wanted to try the local food, but decided to use appraisal to first examine the ingredients. The skill discovered dangerous bacteria in the meat, which shocked him. He saw a farm tools store with a beautiful grapevine. He asked the saleswoman for one of the tools, and she agreed. The hero asked the owner for a grapevine sapling, and he allowed it. The owner advised him, as a new adventurer, to buy leather armor and a good weapons store. He imagined the metal armor heating up in the summer and agreed with her advice. He thanked the woman for her help and valuable information. In the armory, he picked up the first sword he came across. He noted that it seemed quite comfortable to him. He tried using appraisal on the weapon, but it didn't help much. He ended up buying a sword, some maintenance tools, a belt, and 2 knives. He bought a set of sturdy leather armor, a belt pouch, and a monster carcass bag. After all this shopping, he felt like he needed a break. He found an inn to store his luggage, but he had no intention of staying the night, planning to return home. He decided to return tomorrow to visit the guild. At the guild, he told the girl at the counter that he wanted to register as an adventurer. She said fine. The girl asked if he would pay the registration fee or complete a free quest. He decided to pay and submit the request immediately while his adventurer card was being processed. He began reading a book about the demon forest to learn about the monsters. He discovered that they were animals possessed by evil spirits and that they were opposed by sacred animals. A man approached him and asked if he had requested an escort to learn the basics of being an adventurer. He explained that he wanted some advice because he wasn't confident in his abilities. The man introduced himself as Ding, a 2-silver-star adventurer, and said he was training newcomers. He realized Dean was the instructor, so he came alone. He had already started introducing himself, when suddenly, he was interrupted by a girl who also shouted, "Dean!" He realized they were namesakes, and the girl began to scold Dean the instructor for his willfulness. Dean the instructor told the girl to shut up and not use it to communicate with the aristocrats. Jin thought the guild had complicated rules regarding aristocrats. The girls argued about who should fulfill the aristocrats' requests. One mentioned that a certain Chris would be returning tomorrow, while the other objected that everything couldn't be left to one person. Dean said he wouldn't be the contact person, as that was the guild's responsibility. The girl reminded him that there were currently only 2 silver-ranked adventurers in the city. The girl coquettishly asked if he could come to her aid. She noticed Jin looking at her and asked if he wanted to intervene, but he thought he wanted to go home. Another girl called her Ms. Kaina. She thanked her and sarcastically asked who was the main culprit behind her spoiled behavior. The girl behind the counter apologized to Dean for their behavior. She said he could decline the training request, but then he would have to choose another candidate. He realized they were related. He thought that while there were normal relationships between brothers and sisters, He couldn't bear to watch this now. He said he no longer needed an escort and was withdrawing his request. The girl apologized and offered a refund, and Dean, the instructor, exclaimed in surprise. He thought that sisters loved to pick on their brothers, regardless of age. He couldn't stand that kind of relationship and didn't use his break bond skill. The spirit said he could speak to her through his thoughts. This is how people usually communicate with spirits and guardians. He asked if she could read his thoughts, and she replied that she could only read the ones he wanted to show her. He thought he wouldn't hesitate to use break bonds on his sister. She advised him not to be afraid to use his skills, as they would become stronger the more he used them. She also explained that the wider the target of break bonds, the weaker the effect would be. She explained that if you use the skill on one person, people around you will still talk about it, so the effect will be weak. She said he can use it whenever he wants. He wondered if she would have come, if he had actually used his ability. He decided that since he had no escort, he would go on the mission alone. The hero read in the manual that horned rabbit monsters live near the demon forest. He learned that the horns of weak rabbits are the size of bean seeds, which is why they are called hornless. He decided that with his equipment he could handle them. Jin encountered a rabbit and decided to test his abilities. He figured his storage skill was the perfect place for Zanzenkin, as living creatures couldn't be stored there. He recognized the hornless rabbit by its small horn and the dark circles under its eyes. He realized it was the very monster he had read about. The young man finished off the rabbit with one blow and placed it in a sack, deciding to drain the blood later. He wondered what would have happened if he had taken that sword from the store. He found raspberries, currants, and medicinal herbs, which he placed in the D storage. He noted that this forest, unlike the island, was full of nature's gifts. He found the mushrooms he'd already seen on the island and, using appraisal, confirmed they were edible. He thought about how useful his skills were. Suddenly, a huge horned bear appeared before him. He exclaimed in horror at how huge it was. He thought about how easily he'd killed the bear, and how that sword seemed to cut through everything. Mishto's spirit asked why he didn't use magic. He apologized and asked Mishto not to show up so suddenly. He explained that he didn't know much about magic yet, but he'd try it as soon as he found another monster. Mishto advised him to use the Search skill. He remembered that he had acquired so many skills that he had almost forgotten about it. She explained that he could use magic of different attributes: fire, earth, water, light, ice, darkness, plants, and wind. He immediately used the spell, shouting, "Wind Slash." Mishto said goodbye, saying that other spirits would help him in the future. She warned him to be careful, as talent for magic was quite rare. The young man decided he needed to sell his loot to the guild. He planned to take everything and teleport to the gate. He approached the merchant, asking him to evaluate and buy his loot. The merchant was surprised that he came in such a state, but Jin replied that it was better this way than with his head cut off. He thought the sight of the monster's ripped open carcasses would have been a strain on his former psyche. But now, thanks to his skill, he calmly drained the blood from the rabbits and the bear. The merchant praised him, saying the pelts were in good condition. He mentioned that the Adventurers Guild might pay more, but Jin replied that he'd been warned and everything was fine. The merchant said the appraisal would take 15 minutes. Jin asked where he could learn to brew potions, thinking of the troublesome brother and sister in the guild. The merchant advised him to go to the Doctors Guild or the Alchemists. He added that potion recipes were sold in the neighboring Otael. He was amazed at everything there was to offer, from culinary dishes to brickmaking. He thought the potion recipes seemed easy to make. He decided to treat injuries with restoration magic, but pretend to use potions. He thought that those with divine powers seemed to have high physical stats. The merchant showed him a magic stone that he had read about in a reference book. He was surprised at how small the stone was, thinking it would be the size of a ping-pong ball. The merchant asked if he would sell it, saying it was large enough for powerful fire magic. Jin agreed, thinking he already had some magic. He decided to take a walk and eat before it got dark. Jin saw bread with sauerkraut, ham and cheese on the counter. He thought the sausage was well-baked and free of harmful bacteria. He asked the vendor for one. The young man saw the dried fruit and wondered if it was too fatty. But he decided that since there were so many adventurers here, calories should be at a premium. He wondered whether he should boil them in sugar for sweets or use them as a seasoning for meat dishes. The hero saw brown sugar being sold by weight on old scales. This gave him retro vibes. He smelled sake and wondered if he could drink alcohol. He didn't know the legal drinking age here. And he thought the sandwich looked delicious. After taking a bite, he exclaimed that it was simply superb. He noted the aromatic pork rind and juicy filling, but he wasn't very fond of the bread. He considered getting a pig. Returning home, he told Rin he was back. He thought he hadn't eaten much. Apparently, his stomach had gotten smaller on the island. He told Rin that he'd hunted monsters today and earned some money, but he'd spent almost all of it on potion-making tools. The young man thought Rin wasn't wounded or sick. He simply had no strength left. He knew the treatment was futile, but he continued to do it anyway. He thought the fabric in Kanuma was of rather poor quality, so he didn't buy it there. He decided to read books about this world, since he had the language skill. The hero decided to go to the royal capital tomorrow. He was amazed at how big it was. He asked the guard if there were any guide maps or special guides here. The guard handed him a simple map and advised him to contact the merchant guild. The guard explained that the square was full of children who would show him any sights for a fee. He thanked the guard and gave him a tip. The guard advised him that if he saw a guy with blue-gray hair named Leon, he should contact him. He thought that if he did something wrong, he'd simply flee to the capital of the neighboring kingdom. He was surprised by how many small buildings were connected to each other. He remembered the guard's advice and saw a guy with a suitable description. He approached and asked if he was Leon. The boy confirmed he was Leon and asked what he needed. Jin asked to show him the city, but Leon's heavy gaze frightened him. Jin said the guard had advised him to ask for a tour. Leon, with a menacing glare, asked if it really was the guard. Leon said the circumstances were favorable, and he had some free time. He agreed to show them around the city, and Jin thought he didn't seem so evil after all. Leon recommended the view from the top of the citadel, adding that ordinary people couldn't get there. Jin asked if there were any must-see places. Jin thought that since he'd seen this, he must be something special. He asked Leon to recommend a clothing store or a restaurant. Leon replied that it was too early for lunch, but he knew a popular clothing store. Jin wondered why he was making such a frightening face. Jin asked why the walls of the houses in this city were connected. Leon explained that this was to separate the walls and, consequently, the taxes. Jin asked what taxes were levied here. Leon listed the market tax, the transport tax, the municipal tax, and the glass tax. Jin was surprised by the glass tax, realizing he'd seen almost no glass windows in Kanuma. He asked about the large building in the square, and Leon assumed he meant the spirit branch. Leon explained that everything there was done to please the spirits. The courtyard was planted with many plants, and it was a beautiful place with clean running water. Jin thought that meant they worshipped spirits here. Leon apologized, saying that perhaps he should have gone there first. Jin decided to stop by on his way back. He thought Leon was a good man, even if his skills as a guide left much to be desired. The butler approached them and asked Leon what had happened and why he was there. Leon replied that it was now the Adelheid family's palace, but that it had been his since childhood. The butler explained that the fact was that the young lady was currently being pursued. A woman in uniform appeared, and Jin assumed it was another unfamiliar character. She said they had prepared a carriage because it was unsafe here and they needed to leave. The butler said it was merely a strategic retreat. Leon objected, but the woman stopped him. The butler apologized, saying that Miss Lilith and the young lady were injured. He added that they could not wait. The woman asked why they hadn't used the potion. The butler replied that when the young lady left her family, she had no way to collect her belongings. The woman noticed that they were attracting too much attention and needed to leave. Jin asked how injured he was and offered his potion. He added that his potion assessment showed he was fine. The butler said they were heading to Tiam's shop. Jin introduced himself and explained that Leon had agreed to show him around the city. The woman paused for thought, and Jin offered to take them there by road. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the carriage. Jin wondered if it had worked. He explained that he'd wanted to try the potion on himself first, but hadn't realized it would turn out this way. The butler thanked Mr. Jin, saying they'd been a great help. Jin, however, thought he didn't care about the store anymore as long as they got him out as soon as possible. Leon woke up in the carriage and asked where he was. He said that even though Lilith had kicked him out of the house, he was sure he had done nothing wrong. Lilith replied that she knew he was innocent, but his younger brother seemed content with the fact that he was still alive. Jin wondered why the victim of a domestic dispute was giving city tours. He also wondered why the butler called Leon young lady. The butler called out to her, calling her Madame Adelheid. He turned to Thom, saying they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and asked her to prepare clothes for Mr. Jin. Leon apologized to Jin for the interrupted tour. He told Tame that he was leaving everything to him. Lilith apologized for not introducing herself immediately and gave her name, Lilith of the Anverland family. She gave Jin a ring, saying it would help him get an appointment with her. Jin thanked her and asked why she called Leon young lady. She replied that that's what they called her, Leon. She explained that Leon was actually a girl. Her real name was Leora Adelheid. Lilith added that she has a flat chest, a stern face, and a strength that most boys would envy. That's why many think she's a boy and call her Leon. The butler apologized to Jin for disturbing him. He warned him that all clothes were made to order, so the prices were quite high. Jin realized it wasn't a store, but a tailor's shop. The maids immediately surrounded him, offering him fabric and buttons to choose from, and began taking his measurements. Jin thought he hadn't forgotten anything and put his purchases in the e-storage. He said the only things left were books, and he'd found the sheets and bedspreads at a nearby fabric store. Returning home, he decided to read some of the books he had bought. He realized that reading in the evening was only possible by candlelight. He decided to make a lamp out of rapeseed oil, since he had no alcohol. He thought today had been a bit odd, but useful. He noted that, although she had some odd priorities on the tour, she seemed like a good person. He didn't know how things were between them now. But he hoped she was okay. He thought it had been several months since Rich had regained consciousness. He'd taken tentative steps at first, but now he was getting better. He said he had been visiting farmers and carpenters in recent months to learn how to raise livestock, make cheese, and master their craft. He decided he wanted to make himself as comfortable as possible before winter, so he planned to build a laboratory. He thought he needed to gather more materials while he could. He remembered that he'd recently bought a cork oak sapling. He decided to plant it. He thought about the amazing power of this seedling, because he had already used it on the grapevines. He decided the sapling would make excellent material. He planned to go shopping in Kanem, as the e-storage had accumulated a large amount of loot. The young man thought he'd been stalked lately by the pink-haired sister from the Adventurers Guild. Apparently, she'd gotten into trouble for his work with the Merchant Guild. He decided it would be better to rent a house to avoid arousing suspicion. The girl was surprised, but he thought he was staying in a hotel. The realtor explained that in this world, older homes are more valuable. Repairs and improvements are the responsibility of the previous owners. He agreed, thinking that he now had a home where he could freely use teleport. He also decided to help the carpenters to gain useful knowledge. It got cold outside, and he saw that same girl. She complained that she didn't have enough change. She asked if he was going to the demon forest, warning him that it would become dangerous with the onset of cold weather. He thanked her, saying he was aware of it. She asked him not to overdo it, reminding him that life was much more important than money. He replied that he wasn't forcing himself to do anything. Her older brother approached them and, recognizing Jin, apologized. The girl behind the counter asked him if he was planning to visit the Adventurers Guild. She mentioned that Kaina was constantly getting scolded by his superiors. Her brother explained that she was being blamed for the Merchant Guild's capture of a promising adventurer. He assumed it was because of him and his sister. Dean said he'd drop by the guild, but he had one condition. He admitted he shouldn't have taken that quest, but added that the pink-haired girl had behaved much worse. Jin asked him to keep his sister away. He didn't want her following him and trying to start a conversation. Dean was surprised and asked if his sister wasn't cute. Jean wondered if it was time to take off his rose-colored glasses. Jean replied that she had a disgusting personality and wasn't his type at all. Dean asked what kind of girls he liked then. He replied that if he could choose, he'd choose someone who was the complete opposite of his sister, minimal makeup, and no ostentatious displays of femininity. Dean offered to show him where the rare herbs grew as an apology. Jean agreed, as he had planned to go get them anyway. He found an herb called kinka. He thought it was a useless thing used to enhance the flavor of expensive alcohol. Dean complained about the grassy, earthy smell. Jean replied that rich people have their own quirks and suggested catching some rabbits for dinner. Jean remarked on Dean's precise and economical movements while hunting. Dean teased him, saying he'd hunted bears himself without any problems. He was surprised to see Leon, or Leora. He asked what she was doing there. Leora replied that she'd been bear hunting and had come here looking for water. Jin thought he probably shouldn't call her by her name in front of Dean. Dean asked if they knew each other. Leora introduced herself as Ash, and Jin breathed a sigh of relief that he hadn't addressed her by name. Leora apologized for the incident, saying she hadn't noticed how much he was suffering and hadn't paid for the potion. Dean offered them something to eat. Dean said bear hunting was a lucrative business, so paying for the potion wouldn't be a problem. He added that housing was expensive here. Jin asked what kind of hotel it was, and Dean replied, 1 gold piece a day. Leora recommended it to him, and Jin was shocked he'd agreed to it. Dean explained that Amila was simply overworked and it was the hotel's fault. Jin thought their relationship looked creepy. Dean added that Amila was very sweet because she did everything she could to help others. Leora, however, asked him not to look at her like that. Leora said there's a spirit near Amila, and Dean has a mark of that spirit's influence on his head. She asked him to look at the flower, saying that it looked artificial. She explained that it was some kind of controlling spirit, and its influence had suddenly ceased, causing Dean to lose consciousness. She asked if he could touch them. Leora explained that this was their special bloodline. It was the first time she'd encountered someone with abilities on par with her father. She advised him to be careful. She said this ability was quite in demand. Leora was surprised he didn't get her joke. Jin thought she now knew he could see spirits. She realized he was seeing her only for the second time, and that she had stepped down the same path. Jin thought, "You saved me, and this man is your friend, isn't he?" She said it was her fault, and suggested they just wait and see what would happen. She thought he seemed like the type to draw the wrong card. She asked if he could see the spirit attached to her. Jin replied that he would look now. Jin asked if it hurt, and Leora said it was a constant dull ache. He wondered if she really called it a dull ache. He used assessment and learned that the spirit's name was Lu. He was captured by Leora's father to make her more masculine. Leora explained that her father had bound this spirit to her when she was 7 years old to make her a worthy heir. Jin asked if she had a younger brother. She told me that her father had once gotten drunk and woken up next to a woman, and that she later left the baby at home. Jin wondered if she was a courier. Leora explained that in their country, the firstborn is considered the heir, regardless of gender. But their family is a hereditary military family, so her father had attached a spirit to her to prevent it from interfering with her training. Jin asked if it was strange to try to impose masculinity, suggesting they weren't aware of the true purpose. Leora confirmed this. Jin said it was impolite to pry into family matters, but she needed to get rid of this spirit immediately. He added that the spirit seemed to be fed up with it too. Leora asked if he could do anything about the collar, as her father was no longer able to. She asked him to release the spirit when they returned to the city. Leora had asked him to do this. Even if it didn't work out, she wanted to thank him. Jin remembered that she had come here to hunt bears. Dean woke up and apologized, saying he'd spoiled her too much. Leora replied that, once he'd fallen under the influence of the possessing spirit, he couldn't help himself. Jin thought the guild would be in an uproar if they found out about this. He decided to consult with Kaina and take Amila to the spirit branch. He thought there was a similar place in Kanuma. Leora explained that it was a place where spirits gathered and where they could be cast off. Leora advised him to use bear carriers if he was going to hunt bears. Jin wondered what they were. She explained that they were the ones who carried the adventurer's loot. She gave him a note with the location and time, saying she had already made arrangements. Dean winked and said he wouldn't tell anyone he could see and touch spirits. Jin thought, so he finally understood. Leora noted that Jin's fighting style was fast and efficient. She thought she should thank him. Jin thought her movements were the perfect role model. He decided that, using his talent, he could copy her techniques. The carriers were frightened when they saw Rich and asked them to carry something on their backs. They were afraid their cart would break down. Leora apologized for dragging him into this, and they carried the wolf carcasses together. Jin thought it was a good thing they hadn't gone bear hunting. Leora asked where the butler had gone and if they could meet in Kanum. She added that she could remain unconscious longer than Dean. Leora said the renovations had been worth it and he had good taste. She asked how about a hot bath, and Jin smelled wolf meat. Jin said he'd draw a bath. He explained that there was a bathhouse nearby, but assessment showed there were hygiene issues there. He said the bath was ready and the toilet was outside the door. Leora thanked him, and he said he'd be upstairs. He decided to teleport home, change his clothes, and set up the guest bed. He also thought it was time to install a bathtub. When he returned, he invited Leora to begin. He felt as if the bird couldn't stop. He decided that if he could, he would remove the collar. He touched Leora and thought she really was flat. He felt nothing and called out to her, but she was already asleep. The hero told the bird that she had done her job and could rest. He ordered her to stop tormenting the man. He thought he needed to buy furniture for the 3rd floor. He didn't know when she would wake up, but she might have to live here for a while. He saw that she was still not awake, and at that moment his name was called. The young man was surprised to see Mishito, Ludore, and Pao. He asked what brought them here. Ludere apologized for the suddenness and said they had a favor to ask him. Ludere said his sister was using too much magic and that it was reckless. Mishito added that it was probably because she couldn't see spirits yet. Mishito explained that the spirits had run out of steam and were about to disappear. She mentioned a certain Namine who seemed to have given up. Mishito said his sister would be able to see spirits once Namine regained her powers. She expressed concern that by then she would cast Dominate on all the spirits. Ludere said she knew he didn't want to get involved, but the spirits had become unbearably noisy and she was responsible for silence. Pal said they couldn't restrict the heroes, but if this continued, it would affect many. Mishito asked him to look out the window. Mishito explained that his sister's Tia dominance affected everyone nearby. Therefore, the spirits were drawn to someone with the freedom skill. Pal advised him to simply name them. She said that doing so would dispel dominance. Ludere explained that there was no need to worry. Just numbers or something like that would be enough, and if you don't like it, you can rename it. Ludare added that the named spirit would grant him its power, and if he found a good spirit, it would be better to give it a personal name. Mishito said they were forbidden to enter the house without his permission, and suggested they go out and begin. Jin thought he wouldn't have a peaceful life without this procedure. 2 hours later, he was still naming the spirits. He called them Red 1, Green 1, Yellow 59, and so on. Mishito asked who Ash was, and he replied that the escape had been successful. He asked if she had followed him, and she giggled. He saw Ash, who turned out to be a spirit, and realized she was with Leora. He explained that he had freed her from the spirit, but she still hadn't woken up. He thought Mishito had immediately realized it was a girl. She'd said she'd never intended to get physical, and then coquettishly denied it. She said with a smile that now she wouldn't need to go to the bathroom in her sleep. He exclaimed that that was it. She thanked him, saying she hadn't thought about it at all, and added that she would wake up the day after tomorrow. He asked the name of the baby on his shoulder. He said that, based on the appraisal, the bird's name was Lu. She replied that the previous contract had been terminated, and he could rename the bird, which, he said, she also wanted. The hero pondered what to name the soft-feathered bird, suggesting Fluffy. He admitted he wasn't good at coming up with names, and the bird agreed, thinking of its blue feathers. He explained that the name was short for the Italian word for blue. The bird asked if he would stay with Ash, and he replied that she might get lonely if the bird disappeared, so he agreed. The young man asked if she would like to return and continue handing out names, and she agreed. Upon arriving, he thanked Kadar and Ish for their assistance. He suggested continuing, listing the colors, and said they might have to do it again in a month. When he thought it was over, she asked him to wait and create a ball of light. She told him to open his eyes, explaining that she had mixed light with darkness. She added that this was the result of the light spirits gathering to give him strength, and the old woman warning him of danger. He thought the ball of light had worked fine before. Then he remembered Mishito's words about the importance of imagery when using magic. He considered asking them. Then he approached them with an offer to see if they wanted anything. He thought they looked rather strange, one of them especially. The blonde man asked if it was okay to eat so much salt. The protagonist worried that something would happen to him, but decided he knew better. He asked if spirits could eat, and she replied that only the strong ones could, and even then, they had no taste. The old man explained that other spirits fed differently depending on their attributes, such as dew or flame. He asked to wait while he finished eating. The man named the wolf Rin and said he was his teacher, a wolf of darkness and ice, and asked what his plans were for him. She apologized, saying they could be suspicious. The old man added that before he lost his powers, he was a god who destroyed the earth. The dog said he didn't listen to anyone and destroyed everything on a whim. The guy responded that he was some kind of alpha dog. She asked again what an alpha was. He explained that an alpha is the leader of a group who demands unquestioning obedience, and if someone disobeys, the alpha becomes cruel. He added that the alpha is the strongest male, for whom no rules apply. She clarified that Rich was a spirit wolf, and the man asked if there was a difference between a wolf and a spirit. The old man said that some follow their nature, while others don't. He remembered that Rich could speak and was intelligent, and advised caution. He said they'd never spoken, and the dog relied on instinct, but his form was cute. She replied that he was very important to her, to which he blushed and thanked her for the advice, thinking to himself what a devil she was. They thanked him for his work and expressed hope that he would continue to support the spirits. He replied that he understood. He thought he was a lone wolf then. Looking at the dog playing, he decided he wasn't pretending. He said that he had arrived in the pottery town today to order a bath. The man introduced himself as Malcolm and asked about the new product idea. He replied that his name was Gene, and it wasn't an idea, just a bathtub. The craftsman said it was a coincidence, as he'd received a commission for bathtubs from aristocrats in a neighboring country. Jin was surprised and said he'd just started making a prototype of a clawfoot bathtub and could guess who the customer was. The master said it was interesting and asked for help developing it. Jin agreed, figuring his abilities would keep him from being recognized, but it was still risky. The man who woke up asked what time it was, noting that it had been a long dream. The genie reported that 3 days had passed. Jin said he'd just put him to bed, and he apologized for disturbing him. When he woke up, he noticed the bird and said he'd already given it a new name while he was sleeping. The bird asked what his name was. The genie replied that his name was Az. He said it was a good name. He said that since the bird had accepted the name, it must have liked Jin. Jin was surprised that he had transformed into a beauty without a frown, and noted that Az seemed to have become attached to him. He corrected her that to others he was handsome, not beautiful. He advised her not to look at his sister, or the pink-haired girl that way, otherwise they wouldn't leave her alone. He asked if he should be wary of Mr. Jin. Jin responded by asking if he was always so trusting. The young man replied that he was safe here, but added that he should be more careful. He said he would bring soup, as he must be hungry. The awakened man asked if that meant he could stay. He replied that of course, since it was night outside. Jin told him to get well soon, as he had to cover the expenses. Ash exclaimed in surprise, "Not." The man asked Mr. Ash if he was okay. The man said they had finally arrived and greeted Jin, saying he didn't know anyone else. He offered to buy them a drink as an apology. Ash introduced his companion, Nuth, a former butler. He explained that he had decided to continue serving Ash because of their long-standing bond, and he didn't care how many there were. He said that when he took the girl to get rid of the spirit, many in the guild fainted. He asked her not to spread the word, adding that she would have to start from the lowest position. Ash said no one is immune to spirits' pranks, and she wouldn't be judged harshly. He added that due to their different values, their pranks could be disastrous, but this time she was treated humanely. The man agreed that Dash wasn't being polite. Ash added that without Dean, everyone would have thought she'd gotten away with it. The man told Dean that his expenses would be covered and that he should go see the secretary. The man said he was staying at a nice hotel and could take Jean there. Jean thought he was feeling ill from drinking. The man asked if they could rent a room there, although they would rather rent a house. He asked Jin if he'd like to spend a day with a mid-level adventurer. He added that he'd noticed Jin's skill gaps and that it would be helpful. The man said the adventurer wasn't very strong, but he was reliable. Jin agreed if that would help, and the man promised to introduce them tomorrow. The man said he had something to add. He advised them, as unusual guys, to try to stay out of trouble. He asked Ash to stop frowning so much. Ash replied that he couldn't disagree with the look. He wished Rin good morning. Looking out the window, he saw that it had started snowing. He ate, thinking that the sour plum jam and cheese were a wonderful combination. He noted that winter had arrived. He thought that last time he met winter in the mountains. Jin said it was delicious. He figured Dean was introducing him to an adventurer today, and he needed to get ready. He greeted Ash and Not. Ash said he wanted to clear things up about yesterday's business and the payment for the potion. Jin thought he was going to bring that up again. Ash said he wasn't demanding immediate compensation, but Jin suggested they revisit the matter when their lives were more stable. Dean called him over and then introduced them, Letza and Jean. Letza said it was nice to meet him. He said hello and apologized in advance, saying that he was not a fan of formalities. Dean turned to Letzi. Jean said he understood, and thought this was the reliable adventurer Dean had mentioned. Dean asked if everything would be okay, since he had a pretty face. Letze asked not to screw anything up, since he'd already screwed up once, and Jean thought he'd heard everything. He asked if they were sending handsome men to him on purpose, thinking the gray-haired one wasn't enough for him. He decided it wasn't his fault. It was their job. Dean asked Mr. Letze if the request should be carried out in the usual manner. Jin asked him if he had any complexes about his appearance. Dean replied that he didn't know. He thought his request for an experienced adventurer's escort had been granted. He added that, above all, they had a primary goal. He said that fur and meat are in demand right now, so it's better to hunt rabbits. Bears are also available, but only large ones, and horned rabbits have tough meat but beautiful fur. Jin thought the price of bears had dropped. Letze told him to watch, assuming it was him and Ash working on it. He explained that the grass and tracks could be used to determine the direction and type of monster, and Jin thought he was a professional. Letze showed that the rabbit's hind feet left large tracks. He noticed other tracks left by the fox. He assumed the rabbit had horns, and Jin asked him why. He pointed to the claw marks in the snow. He concluded that if a fox chases a rabbit, it too must be a demon, and Jin thought Letze was amazing. Jin wondered if he'd used the search and the sword, and wondered if he'd made too many mistakes. Letze said that while you could hunt normal animals with a bow, you couldn't defeat monsters that way. Letze said monsters were more fun because they attacked, and Jin thought that was cool. Letze offered to show him how to hunt foxes. The woman thanked Letze for the quality product and asked about a raise. Jin thought he had good communication skills too. Letze said Jin's style was similar to Dean's. He added that with Jin's thin hands, his style would suit him better, and Dean offered him a drink. He decided that he would show him, and from that day on he would start training his muscles and go on a protein diet. He said hello and asked if the bath was ready. The technician replied that he was just in time, he had just finished. The hero thought he'd completely forgotten about transportation. The foreman asked if he should order a cart, but he replied that he'd already arranged everything, and the foreman went to pack it. He thought his storage ability was very convenient. He thought with pride that he had done it. Jin called out to Ash, who asked what was going on. She told him she was moving, and he, overjoyed that they had found a new home, asked where it was. He congratulated her, asking if it was a coincidence. She replied that Not had found the house, and he thought it was probably because of him. She thought that when they talked, her mood improved. He asked in surprise when she'd ever felt better. She invited him in, as it was cold outside. He served her tea and thanked her. She remarked that the fig pie looked delicious. She said the pie was made according to Noth's recipe and thought that this butler was no slouch. She asked him what he was doing, mentioning the bathroom. He said it was easier to show her, but she assumed it wasn't a bathhouse. She admired it, and he explained that this is what a bathtub looks like, and hot water is poured into it. She said how beautiful the bathtub was, and that she'd never seen one like it before. He thanked her and suggested they try it out once the walls were dry. She asked if she could call Not. He apologized for disturbing her. Not asked if this was the right bathtub, and she confirmed that it was. She added that she was allowed to use the bathtub when it was ready. He remembered she was from a noble family and that the butler might try too. Not said he should have declined, but it was interesting, and Jin breathed a sigh of relief. Noting that the toilet was separate and odorless, he asked which workshop had done it. Jin replied that it was him. Ash confirmed that Jin had done everything himself, surprising Noth. He asked if they had registered the technology with the guild, and Jin replied that they hadn't yet. Not asked them to register the technology quickly. Jin thought it looked like he was in for some easy money. The young man swore as he stood in the middle of the snowy forest, thinking that it was very cold here, and he thought that he came to the lake to sew a futon, which he wants to give to Ash in honor of the housewarming, but perhaps it was worth sewing a down jacket for himself first, and he decided to quickly finish the hunt and go home. I also decided to get rid of the sounds so that the prey wouldn't escape prematurely. He began to pull the prey with a rope, but suddenly noticed movement around and realized that other predators had immediately flocked to the smell of blood. And he instantly activated the teleport to escape the oncoming flock, and admitted that he had managed to get scared. The young man decided that he needed to warm up a little before going back, and that he needed more feathers. The man greeted Mr. Jin, who asked how the move was going. They told him everything was going well, thanks to him. The hero thought he'd help them out a bit with the renovations, remembering how cramped the space had been. The young man presented a housewarming gift, a futon. The man marveled at its lightness, and Jin informed him it was made from the feathers of a white-horned goose. The butler was shocked to discover it was of the highest quality. The girl remarked that such geese were difficult to hunt, and the man worried that the gift was too expensive for the move. The hero said he'd only spent money on arrows and rope, unaware that they were luxury items. The butler invited the young lady and her companion to dine at his home, since their kitchen wasn't ready yet, or to visit him. The genie asked if he would accompany them. He politely declined, stating that it was not his place to sit at the same table with his hostess. She said it didn't matter now, since Sir Jin was trying so hard for them, and asked if he would mind if the butler ate with them. The hero agreed and invited everyone to the table. He showed me a fig pie, which he tried to replicate. He also pointed to a roast white goose, which the butler called a delicacy. They wished everyone bon appetit. The man praised the soup, and the honey and cheese, and the young man noticed Ash eating with a frightened expression. He realized she must be enjoying the food, since her spoon wouldn't stop, and he felt he understood her better. He noticed that she looked quite pleased. The girl confirmed that she really did like the food. And he was about to bring another pie, but the butler called him. The young man saw the food being attacked by spirits and noted that the two on top were his, while the one below him was unknown. He wondered if Ash hadn't noticed the stranger or if she was hiding his abilities from the butler. Trying to find a way out of the situation, he suggested out loud that it was due to the temperature change. He sighed and said he'd have to clean everything up and get a rag. While pondering what to do with the spirit, he recalled the properties of materials. He realized that spirits couldn't pass through glass and some metals. He trapped the spirit in a jar of brine as punishment, and thought the enamel container was perfect, and he brought it in time, promising his spirits treats later. At that moment, the butler called his name. The hero jumped in surprise and asked if something was wrong. The butler apologized and admitted that the spirit that had ruined the pie belonged to him. He was stunned by what he heard, and he wondered if he'd heard correctly. The man explained that it was a spirit of the snowy night named Quinn, who usually hid, and Ash didn't know about him. He explained that his family, the Powdils, were a branch of the Adelheid clan, and they could not be stronger than the main family. Therefore, the young lady believed he could only see spirits. Jin noted to himself that with his gray hair and amber eyes, he did indeed resemble her relative. He wondered out loud if that meant he could use spirits too. And he thought about the complexities of the mistress-assistant relationship now that they were simply fugitives. And he decided he wasn't going to interfere in other people's affairs, although his doubts remained. The young man asked to be warned next time and offered to bring him a new pie. He asked about the aroma coming from the jar and whether it was brine. The hero confirmed it, and he realized that the butler now knew of his ability to touch spirits. However, he reasoned that they were still in cahoots. Later he moved to a port city where it was quite lively. He figured seafood wouldn't hurt, and that the country bordered his sisters, making it a good place to gather information. According to Mishto, they use as much magic as they want. It is said that spirits whose magic has been exhausted by people are forced to inhabit animals in order not to disappear completely. If the spirit is offended, it turns into a monster, and if not, into a sacred beast. The hero thought that he had come here to see if his sister was exerting influence on neighboring countries, and if there were any rumors about his little sister using magic. Jin wondered how he could find out the details of the situation. He overheard a conversation about someone from Surma ruining their fishing grounds again. Hearing this, the boy thought it was quite interesting. The woman complained that her son had wanted to protest, but had ended up returning completely wounded. And they were outraged that those who called themselves heroes and saints did far more harm than good. Some even expressed hope that the Demon King would take them under his wing. Suddenly, the thief snatched the bag, but Jin intercepted his hand as the victim screamed. Looking at the scene, he concluded that, judging by everything, his sister hadn't changed at all. He decided he would just buy some seafood and go home. The young man enjoys the oysters, and is glad that thanks to the grade, he doesn't have to worry about his stomach. He thinks the grilled oysters are also very good, and he'll marinate the excess in oil. And he turned to Rich, asking if the dog wanted to play. The dog backed away, and Jin was surprised, thinking that perhaps his pet didn't like the smell of seafood. Noticing that it was getting dark, he decided to turn on the light. The light flared too brightly, and he covered his face with his hands, and decided that tomorrow before visiting the guild, he should practice magic to cope with this terrible control. Once deep in the demonic forest, he announced that he would begin training. Releasing the force, he noted with apprehension that it was more powerful than he thought. And he realized that he needed good control even more. Looking at the fallen beasts, he exhaled, hoping he was making progress, but wondering if he'd overdone it. Ultimately, he decided to store the loot in storage and turned on the light, noting that it looked much better this way. Jin decided to check the message board to see what the most popular searches were this month. Someone suggested they head deep into the forest to investigate. The man said he hadn't seen any three-legged creatures during his exploration, but something sinister was definitely brewing deep in the demonic forest. He was told that expeditions were rare, and since there was no demand for three-horned creatures, he couldn't risk it. The stranger struck him with his fist, declaring that the three-horned ones were formidable enemies in their own right, and that they were also the harbingers of black monsters. He added that over time, they would grow stronger, and then it would be too late. The hero heard Dean call the man Chris, and he thought he'd heard that name somewhere before. Someone called out to him. The young man saw Ash and the butler and asked if they had just returned, and they confirmed it. Chris said it was the bear's winner. The blonde man told her that despite the sternness of her face, she must understand the importance of the investigation. She replied that she was a rookie and therefore had no say in the matter. Jin was surprised by the nickname. He remembered that maybe this guy was the one Dean had talked about when he first came to the guild. And he remembered how someone had refused to teach a nobleman, saying Chris would be happy to do business with him. And he thought he was a problematic person. Chris apologized for interrupting and then asked who this beautiful young man was. Ash thought that was certainly a pretty apt comparison for Sir Jin. The blonde man introduced himself as Chris Eads, a silver-ranked, 3-star adventurer. While shaking hands, he asked that his hair and eye color not be presented as something unique. He turned to him and suggested they go hunting for the three-horned ones together. Jin was dumbfounded, wondering what he was trying to get him into. Chris invited the guy to go with them on a three-horned hunt. Jin thought they were trying to get him into trouble. Dean intervened, reminding him that he hadn't even found them yet. The blonde admitted that he hadn't seen any monsters, but his intuition was screaming about trouble in the forest. Hearing about intuition, Dean's expression immediately changed and he agreed, only asking if the matter could wait until spring. The hero was surprised why he so quickly trusted Chris's intuition, and the butler quietly called him. The man reported that a spirit was attached to it. He explained that this spirit gives predictions, and that one apparently cannot see spirits. This intuition greatly helps him in his work. The young man thought that now everything was clear. Few people see spirits, and no one would drive away their beneficial presence. And I thought that they mostly grant minor effects. For example, a person doesn't get sunburned or has slightly better health, and this blonde guy was lucky, he received something like a sixth sense. The guy realized that this was no longer reconnaissance, but a full-fledged hunt for silver ranks, and Chris reminded him that he was indebted to the guild. Dean reasoned that they needed to bring in someone from the iron rank, someone with experience defeating two-legged creatures. Blondie said they needed someone with experience capturing three-legged creatures, as they weren't planning on staying there long, and also to bring in other guilds and gold ranks. He noted the eerie atmosphere in the forest, and Ash suggested that it was due to overcrowding. The young man turned to Jin, apologizing for the request, and asked him to go with them deep into the forest in the spring. He immediately refused, shocking his interlocutor with the speed of his response. Dean assured him he only needed to carry his things and that if monsters appeared, he could just run away. He then admitted he wanted him to look at the spirits in the forest. The boy thought he was curious himself. He also decided it was worth asking Ash, so they could check everything out together. The hero figured Not would go with them, but that wasn't his concern anymore. The man said that it was better to sort this out quickly, but there was nothing to do there in winter, so he had to wait until spring, and he would contact him through the guild when the time came. He agreed. Sitting by the fireplace, he thought that he had learned little information in the port city, and if his sister had used powerful magic, it could have caused the anomaly in the demonic forest. He hated the feeling of cleaning up after them, and he thought that he, his sister, and those two had been here for months, his sister living far from the forest. He decided that tomorrow he would head back into the forest. Finding himself in the inner part of the demonic forest, he decided to turn on his spirit vision. And he noticed that most of them were heading towards his home. But there were also black spirits. Some of them were getting smaller until they disappeared. Jin witnessed the disturbing sight of spirits absorbing body parts from others to restore their own. He realized that healing them wasn't working, so the only way out was to infuse his power and name them, as he had with Rich. And he began to give names to the black spirits, assigning them ordinal numbers from 1 to 4. Having finished, he let out a tired sigh, deciding that was enough for today. He reflected that today had been his initiative. It was difficult to name those spirits who didn't like to be subordinated, and decided to continue tomorrow. Later he looked into the room and asked Dinoso if he was distracting him. The children immediately rushed to him with joyful cries. He was embarrassed by such a tight embrace, admitting he wasn't used to it. And he presented gifts, among which was liqueur, which caused wild delight in the head of the family, and also added that he also brought a cake with him. The boys continued to hang on to him, and Jin thought that in this family he was constantly being hugged. The woman thanked him and offered to cut the cake so they could all eat it together. The boy agreed with Mrs. Shiva, recalling how he'd become friends with them while learning to make cheese on the farm. And he asked what they were doing there, and they told him that they were cleaning beans, which is one of those jobs that you can do in winter in front of the fireplace, in addition to repairing tools and other things. The genie volunteered to help the children sitting by the fire, and the head of the family said she would be glad to help. The woman announced that the cake was ready. Everyone enjoyed the treat, and the girl declared that she wanted to marry Jin in the future. Her mother remarks that he was a good choice and would make her happy. Her father said he hadn't given his consent. Dinoso said that Tina said that when she grew up, she would marry her father. Shiva teased her husband, saying he was a bad loser. The hero awkwardly said that he hadn't really planned on getting married, especially to a child. The father was furious that the guest had rejected his daughter, even though he had just been reluctant to give her up. The brothers joined their sister's plea, also wanting to join Jin's family. Watching them, the young man thought he liked this cozy and cheerful atmosphere. He realized, looking at the people having fun, that his own family was not normal. While he was going about his daily business, he didn't even notice how spring had arrived, and it was time to leave. Chris greeted him with a joke about the Prince of Darkness having already arrived. Ash received a new nickname, Moonchild, which clearly embarrassed her. The man greeted the hero. The young man remarked that he hadn't seen Letza in a while. Letza remarked that Chris had dragged him into this and reminded him to keep an eye on his surroundings. He also added that he didn't like the idea of them bringing a newbie along. Dean said the hero was hunting bears alone. Letza pointed at Ash, assuming she was the famous bear hunting rookie. Ash countered, pointing to Jin and saying he'd been the one doing it originally. The protagonist remembered that he had indeed been away from the guild for a long time. The hunter was shocked by this information. Dean reasoned that the guild wouldn't have let them go on such a dangerous journey if things had been really bad. Chris laughed and said he now understood where he got the premonition that he needed to take the Prince of Darkness with him. The young man wondered if his intuition had worked again, or rather if the spirit had told him so. It was rather strange to see her caressing the dimple in his chin. The guild member thanked Mr. for his cooperation, despite the inconvenience. He politely assumed that Ms. Kana was innocent. She asked him to give her more information about this thing when they returned. She said the guild had asked for a potion for each of them and wished them luck and a safe journey. Dean noticed he had an interesting bag and asked where he got the leather. Ash asked what the guy had on top of his backpack was. The young man replied that he had made the leather himself and had a blanket attached to it. The girl asked if it would get in the way when the monster appeared. The boy doubted that the heavy load could be quickly removed, but Jin showed him a special clasp that would allow the belt to fall off quickly. Chris looked at his gear with interest, noting that it was more convenient than their bags. The man offered to have lunch and said that the weather was good. He thought the walk would be worse. The protagonist began cooking, adding dried chicken, onions, and shiitake mushrooms to the pot. He then seasoned everything with salt and pepper and declared it ready. Dean noted warily that it looked very appetizing and didn't finish. The young man said he could try it, but there was a lot anyway, and he was afraid it would spoil. Chris said the sandwich was soft. The boy remarked that he preferred a firmer bread, but the meat was very tasty. Letze asked what the meat was covered with, and he replied, breading. The butler asked about the breading, not quite understanding what it was. The young man explained that it was pork with egg and flour, sprinkled with breadcrumbs before frying. The butler noted that good oyster sauce is difficult to make. Ash said that was also very tasty, and asked if it was chicken, and he replied that yes, it was fried in oil. The man said that maybe it wasn't that simple either. The young man explained that the seasonings were salt, pepper, garlic, ginger, fish sauce, and brandy. Jin noticed that his boots seemed the dirtiest, and that maybe he was walking incorrectly. Knott's shoes were still shiny, so he decided to imitate his gait. Chris said that from this point on, they would encounter a lot of wolves. The blonde warned them that these wolves were weaker than bears, but they worked in packs, and that they shouldn't rely on them too much and should defend themselves or escape. The boy thought he knew his business and was quite responsible in his work, even if he was annoying. Suddenly wolves appeared. He does not understand why the animals chose him as a target and thinks that he looks the weakest in the squad and said that he can handle them. Chris remarked that his defense looked poor because he didn't need it. Jin thought he wasn't used to being vigilant, and Dean said he looked like he wasn't used to fighting, but his strength was deceiving him. Let's say felt inferior because of the newcomers. The butler said that horned wolves were drawn to the scent of blood, so they needed to gather everything quickly. They decided to leave quickly and set up camp as far away from the area as possible. The protagonist, driving in the pegs, asked if this was enough, and Dean remarked that the guy seemed to have gotten used to it, even though he thought he didn't like hiking. Chris admired how he'd made a roof and a wall using waterproof tarp. The blonde called him the Prince of Darkness again and reached out for a hug, but the hero pulled away, saying that not liking camping and not understanding it were two different things. The boy remembered that, after all, he'd survived alone on the island for almost 2 months. Ash noticed he'd put some moss underneath for cushioning and decided to do the same. Chris lamented that moss didn't grow in the camp and wanted to follow. Dean said they'd go fishing for dinner. The protagonist said she'd make them some soup then, but they told him it was cooler in the evenings and a warm stew would be just right. And he thought that today they would have soup with dried meat, tomato, chickpeas, and vegetables. And he said that he also made some dough. Dean suddenly grabbed his head, realizing he had forgotten something. And I saw him twirling something in his hands and thought it was some kind of strange ritual. Jean decided that while the dough was resting, he would prepare the ingredients for breakfast. Chris asked what it was, and he explained it was a bacon and asparagus pizza, something the blonde had never heard of before. Seeing the finished dish, Dean realized that turning the dough was the ritual. Dvoretsky noted that he liked the salty flavor and that it would pair well with other ingredients. He added that ketchup would also work well. The man asked again what ketchup was. The hero wondered if tomatoes even existed in this world, as he hadn't seen them growing here yet. He thought he'd put sun-dried tomatoes in the soup, but no one seemed to notice. Ash complimented the soup, saying it was also very tasty. Chris angrily declared that Jin would have made a wonderful wife, and how unfortunate it was that he was the Prince of Darkness. He thought he shouldn't feel sorry for being the opposite sex and shouldn't make such a sad face. Dean asked what type he preferred, and suggested that his sister wasn't his type, and that he preferred plus-size figures. Ash was embarrassed by Dean's rather nice chest. The hero thought she shouldn't be envious and silently asked the butler not to be upset. Out loud, she said he wasn't a snob, but he had trouble interacting with people. They asked him if he distrusted people. The guy replied that it was fair to say that, since he was surrounded by people he couldn't trust. He added that, besides, people had confessed their love to him as a joke. Chris was shocked that someone would do that to him. The hunter assumed it was a mistake and the girl was simply scared, but Jin said it had happened 3 times, at 6, 10, and 14, to different people. Horrified, he asked again if he was cursed. Letza said not all women were like that. He replied that he knew and was trying to get over it, and he thought it was all his sister's fault. He remembered that the first time it was her friend's sister whom she had persuaded. The second and third times she didn't show up, but both girls were connected to her. He explained that it was all his sister's fault, as she considered him her property and loved to tease him. So after the second time, he simply pretended to believe it. Chris urged him to stay positive. Jin noted that even though it was spring, the nights were still quite chilly. A bird flew up and said it had come to relieve him. And he was surprised to see Ash. She handed him the treat and thanked him for everything. The girl remarked that the coat was very light and comfortable, and he said he made it as a hobby and reminded her about the refund. He wondered why she had that terrifying expression again and whether she didn't like Florentine cake. She told him he was a good man and wished him a happy life. He awkwardly thanked her for her words. Ash added that the confession was a prank. He thought she was trying to console him. He said he'd met so many people since then, so his mistrust of people was fading. She replied that she'd be glad if their meeting had had an impact on that too. The hero confirmed and said that she would go, and that Ash's straightforwardness was a little embarrassing. He thought she was the complete opposite of his sister, and unlikely to have ulterior motives. He decided he needed to get some rest before the next day. Ledze ate the meat with gusto, and said he felt he was eating better here than in the city. Dean agreed and added that he'd like some beer to go with it. It's said that several days have passed since they left, and all this time they've been hunting and gathering food, reaching their destination. And so far, they haven't encountered any two-horned or three-horned monsters. Dvoretsky said it was redane, ripe yag berries with hints of black pepper, and it paired perfectly with black woodcock. The guy didn't understand the name. Chris was surprised that bread could bake like that in a frying pan. He thought it was made with black woodcock liver pâté, and that due to the lack of milk, he removed the smell with salt water. And he thought that liver contains a lot of iron and vitamins, A and B, which is useful on a hike where they eat meat and fish. And he noted to himself that he was the only one here who cared about a balanced diet. The blonde asked if the Prince of Darkness was going to sleep by the river. He explained that it was not a sleeping tent, but a steam bath, and added that while they were fishing, he had collected branches, tied them together to form a dome, and covered it with a tarpaulin. And he said that there was a fire with stones inside, and when they got hot, they needed to be doused with water. He also added that you can sweat in a sauna like this, and then take a dip in the river. Chris let out a delighted sigh. He declared that he had no equal when it came to comfort. Jin offered him the use of the sauna. The guy asked if the others wanted to join in too, and they enthusiastically agreed to wash themselves. Later, Jin decided that since everyone had gone to the bathhouse, he would sleep outside today. He noticed that there were many spirits in the forest by the riverbank and asked his people to keep them away from him. The hero thought that he would like to catch them and name them, but this would attract attention, and he noted with alarm that the black spirits were becoming more numerous. Dean said he felt refreshed after the bath, and Chris added that they would move faster today. Suddenly, the hunter abruptly stopped the group, noticing a three-horned monitor lizard ahead. Letza explained that they were extremely resilient, and to defeat one had to hit the head or heart. Even so, they could move for a while, and he told the hero not to approach until the hunter gave permission. Explaining that the skin on the monster's back was tougher than bone, so the best chance to attack was when it raised its head and exposed its throat, Dean told Chris they needed to attack from both sides. Ash praised the work and added that everything went as expected. The man said that even though he knew everything would be fine, he was still worried. Jin realized that this strategy alone wouldn't help him. Letza confirmed that his fears were confirmed and that there really were three-horned monsters deep in the forest. He added that 2 weeks had passed, and that hornless or one-horned monsters usually inhabited this area. The hero was surprised by how big the forest was. Dean announced that the goal had been achieved, so they would walk a little further, set up camp, and head back. Chris asked the Prince of Darkness to help butcher the carcass, and he agreed. The man praised the boy's skills, and the boy thought he'd simply been practicing hunting, and had developed his own style of butchering. Stepping aside, he noticed a large black spirit and thought that there were even more of them here, but fewer than on the training ground in the forest, but there were larger specimens. And he wondered if such a big guy would become a multi-horned monster if he got hold of the animal. He asked Letze how much meat was left, and thought the monitor lizard tasted like chicken, and it wouldn't be bad to fry it. He replied that there was quite a lot of meat, and Jin suggested gathering asparagus while the others were busy. The hunter warned them not to stray too far, as monsters avoid fire, but hungry ones might attack. He found winter fuyuhira, mushrooms, and garlic mustard, thinking he could make pasta tomorrow, and decided to use the search. Suddenly, he spotted a two-horned fox. Although it was far away, it had a keen sense of smell and hearing, and he realized it was running straight toward them, unafraid of the fire. And he realized that the fox perceived their camp as a place with prey, and decided that he needed to urgently tell Letza and told her that there was a monster nearby and that he needed to get rid of the smell. The man covered the meat with cedar leaves to hide the smell and handed the boy an ointment that would knock down the smell and told him to apply it and hide on the downwind side. The guy noticed that she was already here and that the fox was weaker than the monitor lizard and could be defeated. "And you can win alone," Letze shouted at him. The hunter, shocked, asked what it was, to which the man replied it was a fox. The man, irritated, said he could see it was a fox himself. The man said that Jin had defeated her. The Deans were shocked that he had single-handedly defeated the two-horned monster. Chris said it was amazing for a bronze rank, but the butler said the main thing was that everything was fine. Dean said the hero was a good man, but something else was troubling him, as they'd thought it would be limited to the monitor lizards. He explained that monitor lizards, unlike foxes, rarely travel long distances. The blonde added that a three-horned wolf or fox would be able to reach the city very quickly, and given that one three-horned monster had already appeared here, the fox had every chance of becoming three-horned, especially since a two-horned creature had already appeared. The hunter said that they needed to report this as soon as possible and they would leave tomorrow morning. The hero said they'd caught a lot of birds and seemed to have enjoyed the chicken. The man replied that it was very tasty, and let's say remarked that he ate better here than in the city. The butler added that the pasta was delicious. It is said that no incidents occurred on the way back, and that the reconnaissance mission has come to an end. The girl thanked them for their work and said that now they needed to report on the mission to the guild leadership. He asked Ash and Noda to take his reward, as he wanted to leave early. The butler agreed. The girl asked what had happened. He said he wanted to draw a bath and asked if they would come to his place today. She said yes. Dean asked if he was leaving yet, and he told him to go and promised to tell him later what the guild had decided. He thanked him. Returning home, Jin sighed tiredly. He asked the spirit to inform him when a guest would arrive at this house. He thought that by keeping the fires burning in both houses, the spirits in the fireplaces could communicate with each other, and he would quickly know if someone was coming to visit while he was away. He teleported to another house to check on it, and thought it was unpleasant to wash in a cold room, and decided to check on the other house. The boy greeted Rich, petted him, and said that he was quite dirty, so they would play after the bath. And he thought he had to soap himself 3 times to wash away all the dirt. The spirit informed him that the guests were already there. The hero teleported back and said that he would be right there and poured hot water again. Jin apologized for keeping them waiting, and they said that here was his reward. And he announced that the bath was ready, and the butler thanked him, telling the lady to go first. Nod asked where he'd bought such a bathtub, and he replied, in the city of Edi, in the kingdom of Pasteur. The butler figured that, given the distance, delivery would take 6 months, and for now, a wooden tub would have to do. He thought that, combined with the ceramic dishes, he probably thought he was from there. The man asked about the robes he'd lent them, whether he could sell them. The hero replied that he'd just been giving them away. The butler said that following today's guild meeting, they had begun forming a strike force, and he and the young lady had decided to join. The young man wondered if this was another foray into the forest, and not refused to accept the robes for free. And he held out a bag of money, and Jin reluctantly agreed. Ash told Note that she was finished. The protagonist said he would prepare the next batch of hot water, and in the meantime, let her drink some tea. Ash decided to help. The butler told the mistress to rest, and the boy thought that, as an assistant, he couldn't allow the mistress to draw him a bath. He said he was going, and the guy asked him not to rush. Jin thought he might have never seen the girl with her hair down before, but he noticed she had that nervous look again and asked if everything was okay. She asked him if he'd seen spirits in the forest, and he answered affirmatively. She said the last time she'd seen anything like that was when the court magician was on the rampage. The guy said that, frankly speaking, he had never seen people use this kind of magic, and asked how it usually happened. The girl explained that spirits give their magic because they like them, or because they are bound to them by a spell, which is a contract, and that spirits give away approximately 1/5 of their power. You can gain more by using the contract or defeating the spirit. Jin said that spirits are made up of their power, so if you use all of it, they will disappear, and asked if that meant those disintegrating spirits experienced something similar. Ash replied yes, adding that their blackness meant they were resentful, and that this process wasn't limited to turning a beast into a monster, it affected the mage and those around them. The young man asked if they could also turn into demons, and she replied that they could. The protagonist thought that in this case, his sister might become a demon lord, not a hero at all, and said that it was better not to use such magic at all. She said that spirits take back more power than they give out, so they become stronger. They are drawn to their corresponding element. They are devoted creatures and find magic fascinating because it unites things that would normally dissipate. And she added that if you don't push them too hard, they'll be only too happy to help. The girl said that Az, too, could have soon turned black, but he still remained by her side. And she thought that, looking at all this, she couldn't compare him to these spirits. The young man realized that the reason Ash looked so depressed was because she saw the blackened spirits, and asked her to wait a minute, later apologizing for keeping her waiting. He treated her to sweets, and asked her only not to tell the butler. She said she'd never seen anything like it before. The guy replied that was why he asked her not to talk, and that it would help her take her mind off things, as it was harmful to remain depressed for long periods of time. The girl apologized for bothering her. Ash thanked him for the treat. The young man offered to wash it down with tea and asked if everything was okay. She said she'd tried apple pies before, but this was something completely different. She asked what those red berries were, and he replied they were strawberries. The protagonist assumed she'd eaten something unfamiliar first and only then asked, and wondered if all aristocrats were like that. Jin asked if she liked it and thought he wasn't used to comforting people, so the only thing he could do was treat her to something tasty. She agreed and noticed that she looked pleased. The girl said she liked it, to put it mildly, and didn't think it would be so easy to get her into such a state. He replied that there was nothing wrong with it. And he noticed that even Az had become cheerful, and was glad that she was feeling better. The young man met Letza and asked if he was going into the forest again. He replied that he was just in time. He also asked her to make him a similar backpack, only out of fabric, promising to pay. The young man agreed and said that Dean and Chris had also asked for backpacks, but only leather ones. The man said he didn't want to stand out, or else someone would steal it. He explained that all silver-ranked Kanums were required to participate in the expedition, unless there was a valid reason for refusal. He added that they, the iron-ranked, had also been invited, and that defeating a few monsters there would earn them a star. The hunter explained that there were many strong players in the iron rank who couldn't advance further because they had few stars, and this was a unique opportunity for them. The guy asked if it wasn't possible to earn stars simply by completing regular guild requests. He explained that stars are awarded primarily for useful contributions, so it's difficult for bad guys to earn a new star. He added that he had concerns about the expedition's composition. The protagonist thinks that, according to Letza, the way to obtain stars depends on the rank. He is a copper rank, but thanks to the many medicines he delivered, he earned enough stars for the promotion test. The man said that copper-ranked players could also participate by recommendation. Jean added that Ash and Not were participating by Chris's recommendation. He then remarked that he wasn't interested and asked when they would start. The hunter replied that it all depended on Amadeo, and that it would probably take a month. The boy asked who it was. He replied that he was a gold-ranked adventurer, and it seemed the guild had managed to persuade him. He told them that Amadeo had teamed up with a mage who would soon reach gold rank. The guild believed that there weren't many new powerful monsters, just one or two, no more, so the help of such an adventurer should be sufficient. Letza said he heard that he could see spirits too. Jin went into the demonic forest and decided to hunt monitor lizards to make leather backpacks for the others. And he caught the black spirit, giving him the name Blackie95, and thought that, if possible, he would catch black spirits and did not want Ash to see them again. He thought that he had a lot of things to do again. Jin apologized for keeping them waiting, but the butler thanked him for his time, and he thought that he had decided to go shopping with them, and gave them the bags that they asked for. Ash apologized for the tight deadline, and the man offered to pay, but he replied that it could wait. He added that thanks to the production, it wasn't difficult, and asked if it was too early to buy. He asked if the quest had been postponed, since Amadeo hadn't arrived yet. The girl said yes, but there were a lot of adventurers here now, so it was better to do everything in advance. The guy thought that, as Letze had said, a lot of people had flocked here. Suddenly, two people approached them and asked to borrow some money. The hero thought in shock that he was being pestered right from the doorway. One of them attacked, but the young man easily pushed him aside. Someone asked if he was okay, and he replied that he was. Dean told them to stop picking fights without even trying to talk. He added that only idiots would mess with a black bear. The butler suggested they grab a bite to eat at a nearby restaurant. Chris supported the idea, suggesting they celebrate their reunion. The protagonist asked what they'd been up to since the investigation. Blondie said he'd had a meeting with the guild, and Dean had fled. Letze said he'd been gathering herbs. The young man thought it was not his place to judge, but since he wasn't the one assigned the quest, he asked where he'd been. He replied that he'd been looking for a new place. Chris asked if he was moving. Dean replied that he'd been living with his sister, but was now living at an inn and had to leave her under their mother's care. He added that the guild had transferred her from reception to the housekeeping department, and if she stayed with him, she'd be able to relax again. Ash said she'd been bear hunting. The boy asked if he'd imagined he'd been called a black bear. Dean replied that she hadn't. The butler explained that he and Ash had become branded as bear hunters, and now people sometimes confuse them. The young man thought that if he had to choose, he'd prefer the wolf. Chris said the bear image really didn't match his unearthly beauty. The man said there was already a wolf king, Bowmore, and there was no point in having a similar nickname. The boy asked who that was, and the blonde man replied that he was a legendary adventurer. He's reported missing, but his fame hasn't faded. Someone asked what Dean meant by fangirl, and it was confirmed. The hunter said she became an adventurer thanks to him and asked if he'd told her about meeting him. Jin, shocked, thought he'd become an adventurer solely for that reason and had reached silver rank. The protagonist said he'd finished the bags, these for Chris and Dean, and this one for Letze. He peered inside and was surprised to see everything covered in leather, saying it would cost more. The butler said he'd brought payment for them, but it wouldn't be enough now. The guy offered to just buy him a drink when they got back. The adventurers said that they would supply him with a barrel and take care of the snacks, and that the cow carcass needed to be prepared. Chris decided to join Letze. The butler suggested they meet there. Jean agreed, saying they were now obliged to return safe and sound. And he said that they would go, and said goodbye. The hunter stayed to sit. The young man asked if he was headed in the same direction. He said he'd rented an apartment near the gates of the demonic forest because they were cheaper there. He added that the landlord had said he'd raise the price after installing modern toilets. Apparently, that was the trend these days. Ash remarked that a toilet with a built-in drain was a very convenient feature. Not said that, looking back, he couldn't imagine how he ever tolerated the smell. Jin woke up, had breakfast, and again went deep into the forest using the teleport. And he began another session of nightly catching of black spirits. He decided that was enough for now and wanted to see the mage from Amadeo's squad at work. He figured the cleanup team would probably be passing by somewhere nearby, even though they hadn't even set out yet. So he arranged with the local spirits to tell him how it would go. The protagonist decided to go a little deeper. He realized that the map he'd been given ended on the eastern side of the forest, and that perhaps this land was beyond their reach, or perhaps it was inhabited by unfamiliar spirits. He decided to head there. Suddenly, a three-horned boar jumped out at him, and he thought it was wonderful, and would make a delicious stew out of it later. And he noticed the wild asparagus just when he was about to cook it, and decided to share it with the butler. Jin saw in front of him what he thought was a leopard, but then he realized it was a snow leopard. He was surprised to think he was trying to say something. Someone had said he had a request. Suddenly, a deer appeared and told me to make a contract with Magir. The boy, shocked, thought it was another animal and wondered if it was also a spirit. He noticed that, although the snow leopard had horns, it had no black spots, and he assumed it was a sacred animal. He asked who Magir was, to which the deer replied that he was his friend. The protagonist said it was a strange situation, and since they were asking to make a contract with him, it meant he was on the verge of turning into a black spirit. The deer conveyed the snow leopard's words that as compensation they could make a sanctuary in any part of the forest that would repel monsters, black spirits, and other demons. Jin thought the forest base might be useful for naming spirits and asked where it was. Bars told him to mount the deer. He mounted the deer and commanded to go. And he asked not to run so fast, amazed at the speed of the deer. The young man asked if it was possible to stop normally. The deer told Magir that Mao had returned. The horse asked why they brought the man here. The young man thought that this was Magir, and Mao was a snow leopard, and he saw that he was turning black, and part of his body had already evaporated. And he said that he was going to sign a contract, and addressed him by name. The boy thought that the spirits told their names to the person they were about to make a contract with. But he could immediately give them a new name, and if they didn't resist, the contract became stronger. Magir snorted, saying he had no intention of making a contract. The protagonist thought that it would be difficult to convince him, and he asked if he was going to use a magic circle or a sealing cage, adding that it would not work against him. The genie asked him not to be stubborn and to say his name. The spirit said that it was terrible. Magir finally spoke his name, and the boy asked if he would now make a contract. He replied that he couldn't hear, and the other agreed. Jin felt all the magic transfer to him and breathed a sigh of relief. And he asked about the sanctuary, whether there was any place with a good landscape, and where the spirits could easily reach. He added that he would not refuse a picturesque place where there was a large tree and undergrowth, and if there was some kind of spring there, then it would be even better. Bars told him to mount the deer, and milk the deer, and Magir snorted, saying he was lucky to be riding Kanola. The young man thought he would have preferred a more comfortable ride. The boy thanked them, saying it was even better than he'd imagined. The spirit said they'd now erect a barrier. And he asked if everything would be okay with the horse. The deer replied that it was okay. He had signed a contract, so he could pass. Jin thanked them for their help. The protagonist thought these places weren't marked, and the map expanded as he visited new locations. He added that he hadn't been to some of the places where he had made a contract with Megir, but they had appeared there too. Jin was delighted that he would now be able to find vegetation similar to Japanese in uncharted lands and expand the map. He thought he had a new base. He thought it was wonderful, and he needed to think about how to develop this place. It was reported that Jin's business had expanded again. It was reportedly the trading city of Naruadid. The young man thought he needed a landmark for building a new house, so he decided to appreciate the local architecture. He noticed glass windows. The young man thought the glass looked like the bottoms of glass bottles had been joined together, but it was the clearest glass he'd ever seen. He noted that the glass in Kanuma was less precise and bubbled. And he noticed there was even a parchment shop with a beautiful engraving on a document case. The shop sold not only dresses but also fabrics. He saw a red glass goblet decorated with gold and couldn't resist. He went into a pharmacy, wondering how advanced medicine was here, and saw cocoa beans. The clerk said that by grinding and mixing them, he could make an elixir of life. He thought it would be bitter without sugar, although medicine doesn't have to be tasty. Jin thought that it seemed like the aristocrats had started mixing them with sugar, milk, and vanilla, and he thought that the price would soon go up due to the rush, and if it did go up, he'd better buy them now. He bought a small amount and decided there was no point in going there. So he decided the appraisal showed that it was a long and arduous production process, and if that was the price they set in the market town, they would be more expensive elsewhere. The young man thought he'd bought vanilla, yellow and brown mustard, and turmeric, and that they were already in the food storage, but he just wanted to compare them. Suddenly, someone called out to him. The man admired the beauty. The young man was frightened, thinking he was a bad person. The man, apologizing for his rudeness, asked where he bought the bag. The guy replied that it was a new item, recently registered by the Adventurers Guild in Azir, and quite convenient. He said it was a shame, since the journey there was long. And I thought that the distance itself wasn't that great, but driving through snow-capped mountains was a real pleasure, so it would be easier to order the necessary documents and start working on them here. The man agreed and apologized for disturbing me. The hero thought he'd been approached about this 10 times, but it was unlikely they'd go to Azir. He decided that if traders came here, they might start building toilets. He stayed at the inn for the night, and the toilets disappointed him, so he decided it was time to move on to his main goal. Someone asked if she could help him with anything. The guy replied that he needed books about spirits, to which the woman replied that this wasn't a specialty store and that he'd be better off going to a bookstore. Jin said he was looking for a good deal. Ash explained that such things weren't officially sold. She added that, of course, it's not entirely legal, but if they can be found anywhere, it's probably in Naruwadi. That's why he hangs out in local antique shops and shady stores. The woman said they were quite hard to come by, as nobles now like to buy books to show off, and merchants build their own libraries to show off. The guy asked for a recommendation for a reliable store. The young man asked the seller if they were having a sale on books, and he asked if he wanted them with the contents or without. The seller explained that there are blank books, just an empty box that looks like a book, and there are real manuscripts, but sometimes their text is illegible due to the mischief of spirits. The protagonist noticed that this book was more expensive, and the seller said that someone familiar with the process could make a decent book out of it. The guy noticed a spirit sitting on the book and wondered if it was a mode, a real-time rewriting process. The employee explained that it was written in a unique set of symbols that could only be read by the person who wrote it. He added that some people deliberately make it so that only they can read books. The young man thought that thanks to languages, he can understand vocabulary and made-up letters, but he has difficulty reading anagrams and permutations of symbols and words, of course. The young man said that this book had another volume for combining magic circles and diagrams, and asked if there was a book with a similar cover. The seller replied that they did, but it was full of confusing illustrations and diagrams, and the price was quite high. Jin, without hesitation, said he'd take it. And he thought that if spirits were flying around, it was definitely something worthwhile. He also bought books on history, medicinal herbs, and alcoholic beverages. The guy thought that he had achieved his goals, and the money had run out. It was time to go home. He thought the first book was about the advantages and disadvantages of making contracts with spirits, and the risks could vary depending on compatibility and mana levels. They also depended on the spirit's contract. They came when their name was called. Jin thought that magicians and sorcerers borrow power from the spirits around them, but the spirits aren't always nearby, and it's not a fact that the element is suitable. If you summon a fire spirit in the cold, it will be very tiring for him. The hero thought there were many spirits, so he didn't consider how different they were. He felt something was wrong when he observed the spirits who helped him after he named them. They were different from Mishto and Kalaf. And he decided that it was better to forget about this clot of light altogether, and thought that he had nothing to do with it, and it was not his fault. The young man thought that he didn't think the spirits would listen to the one who destroyed their home. The butler said a hot breakfast was always good, and the food was delicious. He was glad they enjoyed it, adding that Ash and the others were going on an expedition today, and since they had some perishable food at home, he'd invited them over. He explained that breakfast in this world consists of flour products and bread, some can afford dried fruit and meat, and vegetable soups are usually eaten cold. That's why they're so fond of hot dishes. The guy asked if they cooked in the mornings. The man said they only brewed tea, the rest was bought on the street. In the morning, as soon as the sun rose, people were already rushing to work, and it was difficult to keep the fire going. He thanked her for the treat. Ash said they had to go, otherwise they would be late. He handed them the lunch and said there was quite a lot of it, so they should share it with Dean and the others, and be careful. They thanked him again and left. He thought it was time to buy building materials. Jin told Rich that a safe zone had appeared in the forest and that he could come with him and then teleported away with him. The young man noted that the spirits immediately disappeared and asked if he had surprised them enough. Richie had given him permission to play, but not to go beyond the faintly glowing barrier line. He then decided to clear a space for the construction site. The guy thought about it and decided to build a small 2-story house. And he decided that each floor would have one room, the first one for tea, and the second one for rest. He also thought about a garden and a place for Rich to play, so that Rich could stay with him during the daytime while he was naming the spirits. The protagonist reported that it had taken several days to buy the plaster, stone, wood, and bricks for the fireplace. He thought it wasn't so easy after all, and perhaps it was time for a lunch break. He mused that he still didn't know how to organize the garden. As Rich was very curious, perhaps he should plant a little bit of everything. He decided to decorate the walls of the house with grapevines and climbing roses, and it would be nice to build a coffee siphon. The young man was surprised to see a snow leopard and a deer. And he was surprised that even the horse had come. The spirits cast strange glances at Rich. The animals asked why Mr. Rich was there, which surprised the hero. The spirits were surprised how Mr. Rich ended up there. The deer relayed the leopard's words that he had disappeared 5 years ago, and rumor had it he had vanished because he had failed to summon the heroes. The boy asked Rich if he had ever commanded these guys. And I thought that such a look could be interpreted in different ways. He doesn't remember, he doesn't want to remember, or he finds it difficult to think about it. The young man thought that, given their familiarity, this must have been Rich's former home. He supposed the wolf would feel more at home in the forest than in the city. The deer said that Mr. Rich was stronger than any other spirit and freer. He added that his voice could reach every corner of the world. The protagonist thought this guy seemed like a big fan of Rich's. The spirit said he was protecting this forest from people who called themselves the Apostles of the Wind. Jin asked who the Wind Apostles were. Snow Leopard said it was a majestic pose. The spirit said all traces of it had disappeared about a year ago. The boy wondered if that was when it had led him home, where there was a barrier isolating him from the rest of the world. And he realized that Rich had saved this forest from the Apostles of the Wind, and that was why there was a forest to the east and mountains on the west coast. And he said that the Apostles of the Wind are the previous heroes and their followers. The guy was shocked that the heroes of the past were destroying this forest and thought that the heroes here are always this bad. The deer said they plan to weaken Kamig's influence over the forest and then create means of transportation on water. The hero realized he was talking about ships and felt uneasy about using Narwadita's resources. And he apologized to Rich, thinking that he had apparently been doing the same thing, and was afraid that one day he would hate him. The spirit said this was a problem, and trees still didn't grow in the west. Jin thought that cities and trees were safe places for people to live, but that required clearing the forests. And as they ventured deeper into the forest, they would inevitably encounter spirits, monsters, and wild animals. He believes that people cut down forests, built more boats, and expanded their territories without realizing the danger. The horse said that today's heroes are not peaceful, and their magic turned his body dark, so that now his comrades will not suffer grief. The genie said to thank them. They were the ones who organized everything. The spirit said that something really nasty was going on there. Someone said that even if high-ranking spirits don't particularly need anything, they still have to grow and consume. Although they are weaker individually, the hero will protect them. And he said he shouldn't get too close to the hero. She is much stronger. The young man said he hadn't intended to. He didn't regret asking for the vault, but he might have to think about how to become stronger, as the god's gifts make him stronger. But that's not enough. He needs to know how to fight. The boy asked if he had lost not only his strength, but also his memory, and asked the horse what he knew about Rich. He figured the map showed the zone of influence of the gods and any spirits associated with them, and Rich's influence on these forests was currently low. Magir said he didn't know all the details. The deer said that Lord Rich was great. The snow leopard added that he was braver and wiser than any other spirit. He wished himself bon appetit, and remarked that it was delicious. And he thought that with the construction of a house in the forest reserve, he would like to take up farming. He hopes that potatoes and tomatoes will become more common in this world. For now, these vegetables can only be found and grown in this house. Jin thought that, judging by what the book said, a good harvest could be ensured by befriending the local spirits of the earth and water, and maybe one day he would be able to eat something in a restaurant that included these ingredients. And he decided that he would have to build a few more houses, cultivate a few fields, and perhaps give names to some spirits, and it was good that he was used to the constant workload. It was time to get down to business. The young man thought the planting and construction had gone quite well so far, and he planted a few vegetables from the pantry, hoping the local spirits would be able to retrieve them. He decided not to use the growth powder this time. He decided it would be more interesting with potatoes, tomatoes, zucchini, basil, arugula, and lettuce. He wondered how the expedition was doing, not worrying too much about them since the guild and other countries had sent their own teams. The protagonist praised Rich and thought he could ask Dinosaur to throw a frisbee, since he had such a knack for it. He then told his pet that they should go home, as he wanted to try something. The young man decided to create magic circles, and said that he saw them when he read that book, and he wanted to try making them himself. And he began to pour in the magical power, simultaneously grinding the ingredients, added the water in which the spirits played, and the ink was ready. He decided that now it needed to be applied to the compass. The guy thought that all that was left was to draw the necessary figures from the book and connect them with symbols from other books, and he wondered what kind of spirit he should try to summon. Suddenly, spirits began to appear, and he asked them not to emerge prematurely and ruin the paper. He wondered what he should do and decided to try ice. Jin remembered that Rich was, after all, a spirit of ice and darkness. He asked his pet to help him refrigerate the food, adding that if he didn't have to go to the mountains for ice, he could make ice cream. He said he'd already planted a field, so a good harvest would be welcome. The young man drew a fertility symbol and imbued it with his magic. Suddenly, a spirit appeared and introduced himself as Pal. The spirit said it was responsible for the land and the harvest. The boy said he remembered and was surprised by what it was. And in a panic, I thought it must be a divine prank, or maybe he really had summoned her. Pal said it was bad ink. The protagonist said he made them according to the instructions in the book. The young man with black hair said it was the wrong book, and the older man said it was only enough to summon local spirits, who have names. The girl said that he was very cheerful, and it was funny to watch him. He wondered why they had all appeared so suddenly. The girl said he had brought many good spirits here. And she added that that's why they feel comfortable here. The boy realized that these little flashes of light were actually spirits, so fleeting that they were born in the morning and disappeared by evening. Jin thought everyone was here now. Ludere, Kadar, Mishto, Halalfa, Ish, Van, and Pal. Ish asked if he could ask them about spirits instead of reading books. The boy, surprised, asked if he'd mind being taught. Wang said fine and suggested they have a little sparring, adding that anything was better than sitting within four walls, and told him that he was moving incorrectly. The protagonist thought that up until this point, he had been trying to imitate others, mastering various things to become stronger. The spirit said he had no control over his movements at all. The young man thought he was simply copying them without thinking about how to adapt the movements to his own body, so he can't say his assessment is wrong. He asked him what he imagined his sword to be. The boy paused and said he didn't even know. Something from fantasy or historical dramas. In his world, swords weren't used anymore. His sister preferred fantasy, and he and his grandmother watched historical dramas. And he thought that those movies had made a bigger impression on him. But this sword was more like the ones used in the games, so he decided to introduce a different sword. The guy thought that Zanzenkin had been transformed, and he exclaimed that it was a katana. He noted that it was a bit longer, fantasy style, and had a silver chain instead of a cord. Wang said it was a very rare type. The young man said that such swords were used in his homeland. The spirit asked him if he would like to continue, and he enthusiastically agreed. The protagonist thought that the blade looked like a typical fantasy sword, and with it, all sorts of effects from games came into his head, but now it's easier for him to imagine the movements, and it became more fun. The man praised him, saying it was much better than before. The boy was glad to hear the praise. Jin thought that of course he couldn't compare to him, since Zanzenkan could cut anything except Van and his sword, since he was its creator. Thanks to this, he can swing at him without hesitation, and he wonders if he can hit him if he gets stronger. The girl told him to keep it up, and Kalaf asked him to give it his all, against all odds. He thought he was surrounded by 2 beautiful roses. Lidere called out to him. He said that the material in this book was misinterpreted, and he said that he needed to go to the temple of Thermisto in 7 days, that is the name of the island south of the Kavim Peninsula. He would make sure that he got the book he needed. The young man thought he had 7 days to raise money for a new book. Someone noted that he'd planted quite a lot. Pal offered her help in exchange for the harvest, and Ish also asked for a treat. And he thought that they loved bread and salt, and it was stupid to refuse the help of Pal, who was responsible for the land and the harvest. And he asked that, don't spirits with human form eat only what they consider tasty. They said they try what they are drawn to or what interests them, and the local harvest is quite interesting. It is said that this is the city of Narwadid. The protagonist said that the truffle pasta was simply delicious, and it was no wonder that Narwadid was considered a progressive city. Jin said he'd teleported here to sell the demon fox's horns and skin, as they were more expensive here than in Kanum. The man remarked on the excellent quality of the goods. He thought he'd solved his money problem, and there was still one more thing to do. He thought that he wanted to buy a sword similar to Zanzenkan, but couldn't find a suitable one, so he suggested that maybe this one would do. The seller said they had spirit weapons. The guy asked again, and he explained that they were weapons possessed by a spirit, made by a spirit, or a spirit transformed into a weapon. And he thought, so Zanzenkan is also considered a spiritual weapon. The man added that the sword's power depends on the strength of the spirit, and it requires no maintenance. The merchant said he could store it wherever the spirit preferred, or in a shrine. The young man wondered if his Zanzenkan was always in storage, and whether he needed to take it out from time to time, and that no one had given him any instructions. The main character asked to show them to him, and he thought that these were the very same golden ranks headed by Amadeo that Letze had spoken of, and he asked the spirits not to interfere so that he could at least see something. Jin thought that he was surrounded by girls, and he heard that he was working with a magician. He had other things to do, but he was afraid of missing something. He thought that all 3 had their own spirits. The woman in the robe, a sorceress, had a spirit of the element of light. The archer, a spirit of wind and greenery, had a bow entwined with tree branches, perhaps a spiritual weapon. The boy thought that this was the same Amadeo that Letze had spoken of, and that his spirit was like a prairie dog. The young man wondered what continent the prairie dog was from and that he had a ton of questions. He then wondered where Ash and the others were. The young man realized they were working together. He noted that Oz, the chin lover, and Dean's spirit, the butler's spirit, must be nearby. During the last expedition, Dean's spirit had reacted to his boots, and he decided to leave them his spirits, just in case. And he wondered why she was rubbing against his stubble, and thought that spirits had such strange desires, and why Letze couldn't protest. The protagonist thought that gold-ranked spirits were probably quite powerful, and that black spirits had little effect on them. He wondered what they were doing and saw them fighting monitor lizards. The guy thought that this adventurer, one of the members of the punitive group, was somehow strange. Jin thought that even though she was an archer, she knew how to fight in close combat. And he saw that the adventurer was possessed by a black spirit. But he was thrown back as soon as he tried to approach. And he thought that now she had returned. He thought that once a spirit had acquired a vessel, it could no longer maintain its power without it, and he wondered if there were any conditions for becoming possessed. And I thought the girl was taking it quite calmly. She must know about the black spirit. I also wondered how to defeat the black spirit. The young man said he knew of no other method but to forge a contract, but he was almost certain they could be defeated with spiritual weapons. The hero wondered if she was really planning to do so, and didn't finish. The young man thought that he was not very surprised, since in this world human life is not valued and bad behavior is common, But for the first time he saw the end of life so closely. And he thought that ordinary people cannot see or touch spirits. But if their container is damaged when they are inside, the spirit will also be damaged, and he wondered why she did not attack the black spirit when he came out. Suddenly someone else appeared. The protagonist saw a black spirit enter his friend. The guy thought that the archer could not see the black spirit and decided that there are different ways to see spirits. Some see only colored spots, while others only see spirits of a certain element or a certain power. Jin concluded that he could see the spirits possessing people, but this time he was only half possessed, and he thought the spirit needed time. He wondered if the two gold-ranked ones could see him. He remembered Let's saying that Amadeo could see them, but apparently discerning a spirit in a human body was somewhat more difficult. She also said that if they had seen him, they would have isolated him from the others, and whether they would even notice him in his current state. The young man decided that he did not have to solve this problem, but he had learned a lot and thought he could cope. And he asked the spirit of shadow and the spirit of light to make it so that his face could not be seen, and to raise his body 10 centimeters from the ground. The young man asked to make sure that the hood did not fall off and that his legs should not be visible. The main character decided that it was time to go. Amadeo asked what was going on here. The girl said that she herself did not understand anything when this guy suddenly appeared and asked for forgiveness. Everyone was shocked to know where he came from and who he was. The guy thought that even if he introduced himself, they still wouldn't recognize him, except for these guys. And he asked the spirit of sound to change his voice. Jin said not to pay attention and that he needed to get something out of this guy. He asked again, horrified. He plunged his fingers into the boy's body and thought he was imagining it. And he grabbed the spirit so that it would not escape. The sorceress asked if he was possessed, and said that another guy had attacked. The wounded adventurer was still alive. Everyone was shocked that he woke up, and they wondered and couldn't believe that he had recovered. The girl asked who he was. She asked about the spirits around him. The young man remembered that the spirits were currently free. He usually told them to stay away so as not to attract attention, but now he needed their help. And he thought she could see them. The young man said that he didn't know where they had picked up the black spirit, but first the spirit had possessed the wounded boy and asked them to be careful. The protagonist thought that Ash was looking at him, but he was sure that she would not be able to recognize him. Amadeo shouted after him to wait, but he had already teleported away. The guy thought that he seemed to have managed to settle everything. Jin thought that the black spirit was still in his hands, and he needed to make a contract and release it deep into the forest, and noted that it was the largest spirit he had ever seen. He thought that the horse was a big black spirit, but he could still maintain his composure and had to use brute force. The young man mused that black spirits ate other spirits, either to replenish missing body parts or to replenish their strength, and in any case, it seemed that they continued to feed on their own kind. And he remembered the horse saying that if he made a contract, the loss of power would subside, the thirst for power would continue, but the pain would disappear, and the spirit would be able to control itself. And he thought that this was how he forbade the devouring of other spirits, and said he could return home. The young man took heart, and said that they had worked hard, and asked what had happened to them. The protagonist wondered why they were apologizing, and that one of them was possessed by a spirit, and the archer almost defeated that guy. The guy decided that he would need to ask more questions when Ash and the others returned. Jin asked him to undress, which really scared him. The children asked if they could join them, and they were allowed to. He said he'd do the laundry and offered to change her clothes. She explained that the children would be going to tend the cattle while she and her husband worked in the fields and asked if it would be okay if they got her dirty. Jin replied that he'd wanted to give her to them anyway. The man, perplexed, asked what he had done so early in the morning and whether Shiva was in on it. She said they would bathe him at the well and then dress him, and he asked her not to ignore him. The young man said that it was time to get started and that there was a reason why he had come to their house today. And he thought that for the last few days he had been studying with masons and carpenters, and the more he learned, the more he saw unsanitary conditions, and that the entrance doors were placed higher so that dirt from the street would not flow into the house during the rain. The young man was angry that at least they would clean up the horse manure, and why not use it as compost or fuel? The protagonist reflected that the Dinosaur family slept on straw covered with cloth. Other farmers slept directly on straw in barns, and that there were many people in this world who were simply trying to live in the present moment. The guy realized he wasn't the type to constantly try to change things, but he wanted at least his friends and acquaintances to keep things clean. So he decided to figure it out. Jin decided that he had to give the Dinosaur family credit. They were pretty clean by local standards. And there were some good people among the other farmers too, but their homes were such a mess that he didn't even want to go there. The man enthusiastically declared himself a cleaning genius. He replied that he had done everything he could, and all that remained was to repair the door. Dinosaur said he'd take care of her tomorrow and invited them to stay for tea. The parents asked the children to clean the quail and bring back the eggs. They agreed, and someone asked if the hero liked cleaning. The young man replied that he rather hated it. The man asked why he had done it then. He replied that the unsanitary conditions had motivated him to clean, which was why he had come there in a fit of anger. Shiva said he simply loved cleanliness. The man said it was quail and green onions stewed with liquor in a pot, Shiva's signature dish. The genie said it looked delicious. He thought quail meat was delicious on its own, but paired with onions and liquor, it became divine. The dish is reportedly made by simmering quail and green onions in a sweet liqueur that has stopped fermenting, but the sugar remains. The young man decided to add this dish to his recipes. The woman invited everyone to the table. Everyone wished each other bon appetit. He thought that a hot meal among family meant nothing to him. For him, the Dinosaur family was the epitome of family, and he wondered if he would ever be able to create the same warm family hearth as they had, with someone he hadn't quite managed to reach an agreement with. They said this was Thermisto Island. The young man thought he'd heard the island was famous for its lace and silverware, but perhaps he should visit the temple first, and that the building Vudere had mentioned must be somewhere around here. The young man apologized and said that he had been told that he had books. They told him it was the same appearance, black hair and violet eyes, and asked, "You're the one Mr. Luderi spoke of?" The hero replied that he had told him to come here, and the older man said he too had had a revelation. And he wondered if it counted as a revelation, that he told him all this straight to his face. He told him to follow him. Jin saw a stone statue of Ludere, and the man first asked him to swear that he would not tell anyone about what he saw there. The young man swore. He saw a secret door. And I thought that this child somehow reminded me of Ludare and asked who it was. Blue hair, blue eyes, although there was no other color. But the appearance was somewhat reminiscent of a Ludere. It was not a candle, but the light of little spirits. That spirit is a child. Well, if he could see him without even using his sight, that means he's pretty strong. He wanted him to follow him. There it was all filled with books. Books about magic and summoning spirits. Besides this, the hero wanted to know how that place appeared. He was told to read the instructions about the place and how to use it, and then he would be able to find the books he needed. The hero thanked the guide. All the information was there. Long ago, in the Southern Empire, there lived an emperor so obsessed with books that he extorted them even from merchants. When his country was attacked by monsters and dragons, and the library was destined to burn down, Luderi moved it to another location. After some time, the child became the spirit of the library. It seems that's why he resembles him. The heroes possessed the same abilities as the Rufus. He wondered what they were. In front of him was a book about their history. Long ago, there lived people who founded the kingdom of Pasa. These were the Roof people. Having received protection from the spirits, even with a small population, they were able to create a powerful state. However, it was destroyed by a grueling struggle for the throne and invasions from other countries. Afterward, the people who had not fallen under the spirit's protection created a country under the queen, of which was a woman who had survived the Roof. These people began to call themselves the Roof people. Once the state fell, the entire royal family was killed. In other words, there were two types of Roof: the Roof people, the Pasa kingdom, and the Roof people, the Roof kingdom. Apparently, the Roof people also knew how to communicate with spirits, although not as skillfully as the Roof people, who were rumored to be descended from the spirits. They were able to rebuild the country by finding one of the Roof people. He liked that library and wanted to visit it often. The hero saw Ash. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. Her hair was wet and she was taking a bath. I didn't like it when the ash was wet. The guy said he could boil water if she told him to. The girl said she couldn't ask him. Her appearance was so bad that it was even uncomfortable to go in. The hero understood her. When he took a bath after living on the island, it was full of all sorts of nasty things, including insects. Their expedition had been longer, judging by the number of participants. It's unlikely she even had the opportunity to bathe in the river. The guy said he would heat up the water and asked where the butler was. Ash replied that he was doing laundry and would come by later. She apologized for bothering her and said she couldn't take it anymore. The hero said he'd make some tea and asked her to wait until the bath was ready. He gave her some tea to drink. The girl thanked him and asked him not to come too close, as she felt that the smell was still coming from her. The hero did not agree with her, but decided not to approach her if that was what she wanted. Ash brought him souvenirs. The guy thanked her and asked what was there. There was magic ore, since his sword was made of ordinary iron. If you mix it with magic ore, it will become much better. The hero thanked her and said it was valuable material. He asked how she was enjoying the forest. Ash said she'd met a man there who resembled him. Jin was scared that she could see his face. He asked her what the man was like. The girl said that he was accompanied by spirits and then was able to catch him, and because of this, she thought that he was a kind person. He had a strange aura about him, as if his attributes were constantly changing. It must be because the spirits were hard at work under the cloak. There was a man in the strike team who was possessed by a black spirit, and the deeper they went, the more abnormal he became. Soon, he attacked Nina, a gold-ranked archer, but she fought back. Then the spirit tried to possess another person. The hero assumed they hadn't noticed the black spirit. When it enters a body, it's difficult to notice due to the owner's aura and magic. It seems even the rose sorceress couldn't see it. The guy asked where the man had picked up the black spirit. The girl said that he should have heard about the war between the small countries of the Central Plains, and it seemed that one of those countries had used a large-scale magical attack. It was a long war. The remaining spirits tried to keep their distance, but that Taka gave birth to a huge mass of black spirits. Jin said that even if they couldn't see the spirits, it should be obvious that black spirits would cause a lot of damage. There had been precedents in the past. Most of the wounded spirits fled, taking revenge here and now, but the kingdom still couldn't count on a good harvest that year. Rose said that the man who looked like a genie could be a descendant of the roof people. The hero thought that he was misunderstood, and that he had nothing to do with it. The butler apologized for his delay. He asked if there was enough firewood. The boy replied that there was, and thanked him for bringing it with him. The man said that they should thank him. Even the aristocrats did not have such comforts as in his house. His soap was unusually hard and didn't smell like an animal, which was surprising. The guy said that when Ash was done, he could take his time and soak in the tub while he baked some goodies. There was enough time to make a meat pie. The cookies were already baked, and the hero wanted to make a sponge cake. He said he'd heard he'd encountered a creature similar to a roof in the forest. It was Lady Rose who made the deduction. Apparently, she had some unpleasant history connected to the kingdom that summoned the heroes. The man thought that she wanted to find the person to confront the kingdom. There were rumors that the descendants of the Ruths were long-lived, but he always considered this a fairy tale, although her theory had a lot of common sense. Jin thought that he didn't belong to them and said that he wouldn't be in the guild for a while since he didn't want to get involved with Rose and the others. The butler said he was right and it would be problematic if he asked Ms. Ash for help, as she could see spirits. They were planning to return there after a short break, so she would be fine if she didn't participate in the expedition. The guy suggested booking a quest for Ash. Given her personality, she would probably prefer the first request. He thought that the best option would be to appear in front of the Rose and say that he was not a roof, but that was a lot of trouble. The hero used the base to make the dessert airy. It was necessary to bake slowly, turning constantly, so as not to burn. The girl asked him what he was cooking. It was a sponge cake, and he also made a meat pie. The boy said that they would eat as soon as the butler finished washing himself. The hero was glad that his comrades liked everything. They did a good job. Today is the promised banquet in honor of their return. Everything looked delicious. The man said he had already forgotten how delicious beef could be. The guy said freshly cooked meat was divine. During the mission, they ate jerky and monster meat. But this did not justify such an amount of meat on the table. Ash wondered if they served meat pies there. She seemed to like his meat pie. The guy said that there were a lot of three-legged and two-horned ones that time. But the worst thing was that the black demons turned out to be wolves. Black demons are monsters whose black spots around their eyes extend further, but there are other types among them, such as those without the blackness extending to more rounded horns. When the black color completely covers the body, the imperfections on the body disappear, and they become beautiful monsters. From this point on, the beast's body is completely consumed by the spirit, making them incredibly strong. No matter how you look at it, their numbers will continue to grow. The situation turned out to be worse than they thought, but it seemed the guild had foreseen it. They sent 3 gold-ranked soldiers there. The rose also had a gold rank. The man had a feeling that some other country was using the terrible rose magic, and the others were talking about summoning heroes in Shulm, and most likely it was somehow connected. Combined effect of war and summoning heroes. Next time, Amadeo will call upon all the strong adventurers in the country, and this will be the first major raid in recent times. The butler asked if the 2 of them were invited to join his group. The guy said that he was invited, but he refused because it was not his, and asked Chris. As a knight, he's not averse to granting the wishes of beautiful people, but he'd rather be the head of a dog than the tail of a lion. Ash also refused. It's good that the hero asked them to process the roots of medicinal herbs. The man said that no one invited him. Jin said that wasn't very insightful of them. He thought it was a compliment, but the hero really thought so. It looked like they were looking for those who had perfume. Amadeo's followers also caused trouble. This was after they learned that he had rejected the offer. But he never turned anyone down. They wished him good luck. The hero was offered to join, but he said that he did not want to sleep in the forest and get into trouble. They say the guild gave gold-ranked genie bags, and now they're inundated with orders. The guy thanked the gold ranks and the Adventurers Guild. Jean asked if she was selling the house in Fox Lane. Fox's End is the name of the street that leads to the alley to his house, and Ash's house, and Ash's house. The butler said that the house next door had recently become empty. The guy said he was just curious about the kind of people who wanted to buy it. The girl asked to wait a minute, although the hero simply asked in passing. The girl asked if he wanted to buy a house. The hero replied that he thought only a silver-ranked adventurer, or higher, could buy a house. He was told that the Merchant Guild and the Healer Guild could recommend him. The guy assumed that he sells a lot of things, and that is why people trust him. He was told that he could buy his current house, or choose a better house on the street. He said he liked his current house, so he would buy it. The girl said that the house on that street was actually for sale. It is currently owned by the Merchant Guild, and they plan to rent it out for short-term rentals until the Adventurers' Raid is over. Few people would want to buy a house on the dangerous side of the wall while the strike force was being formed. The girl said Amadeo was looking for someone, and most likely, after the raid, he would remain in the city, and the house would be rented out to his confidants. It was a secret. The hero was irritated by this. He said he'd like to buy it. Jean would renovate it and rent it out. The guy decided to buy 2 houses at once, and was wondering where to start the renovation. He thought about starting from the back door. The hero met the man and greeted him. He originally went hunting, but there are a lot of adventurers in town now, so he's having a day off. His gold ranks were a hindrance, but now they don't have to worry about the monster tide. They took Dean and Chris with them after all, and Ash went bear hunting. The guy said he knew, because they were his neighbors. The man asked to let him know if he heard about a good offer for housing. The hero thought he was moving. Letsay replied that having reached the silver rank, he could finally buy himself a house, but he had not decided anything yet. Unlike the genie, he went through the whole process honestly from start to finish. The guy asked about his plans for the next day, and said that he wanted to ask for something. The hero told him to hold the doorframe. The man said it was great that he and Ash had their own homes, and asked if they planned to rent out rooms. He'd heard that people coming to town usually rented a small room and shared a well. Jin was in the medicine business and didn't want to share a well. There were too many things he wanted to keep secret, and he wants to be free, but when other people are around, he wants to help them. The hero asked what kind of house he would like to buy. Letsay replied that he would prefer a 3-story building with a store. The attic and 3rd floor could be rented out. The guy asked what he was going to do with the store. The man said that it depended on the wife, and the hero was surprised that he was married. Letsay replied that he doesn't have a wife yet, but that getting married after purchasing a house is the norm. Jin asked if he had anyone in mind. The man replied that there was no one there, as he used all his free time to prepare for work. The conversation about love ended. He said his cooking was as good as always. The guy said the tartness comes from the tomatoes, capers, and olives. Letsay asked what tomatoes were, and the hero completely forgot that he hadn't seen them there. Jin told him not to eat unfamiliar foods without even checking. The man did not understand why this was necessary, and said that everything was fine if the hero had prepared it. The guy was flattered, but he felt a little awkward. Letsay asked if anything was bothering him. Jin replied that he was worried about the gold ranks and their minions, who were causing some inconvenience. The heroes didn't want to join them. This could be a problem if they found out he could see spirits. The guy said that the man was right. However, it dawned on him. He didn't understand how he knew that he was one of those who could see spirits. The man asked if he was interested in how he guessed. He said that Chris always gave a nickname to those who could see spirits, although no one noticed this feature, including himself. Come to think of it, he never called him by his first name for Ash. He always came up with a nickname too. All you had to do was ask Chris. Call him by his name. He was a good guy, even though he looked like a pain. The protagonist said he knew he wasn't a bad person. It seemed Chris often took on assignments from aristocrats because Dean didn't want to get involved with them, so he often ended up helping him out. That made him a good guy. But he was too noisy, so the hero tried to avoid him. He has a very keen intuition, and it's a shame that Chris didn't notice such talent in himself. The guy said that if he told him the reason, he would understand that he could see spirits. But on the other hand, only the hero knows all the secrets. Jin said that it is not a secret if the person himself does not know about it. He asked the guy what he should do. The man thought he was nervous. The hero told him not to enjoy it. Let's say said he knew Chris was really capable of this. Now he was sure of it. The genie said he had deceived him. It was manipulation. The man told him not to worry. He will look after the gold ranks, and the hero can rely on him from time to time. The guy assumed that they had a difference in life experience, or that he was trying to grow a beard for a reason. He tended the vegetable garden, gave the spirits along the route of the strike group, and found out what they were doing. Sesh and I worked together on a cure for the yellow spot epidemic. It turned out to be a very rare cure. It caused a bit of a stir in the merchant guild. The house in Fox Lane will need some repairs once the plumbing system is installed. He had a lot of work to do. But first, he had to pretend he was a roof. From then on, other cities also formed strike teams and began hunting in the forest. Each local guild used spirits to exchange information. Taking advantage of this, he deliberately wanders through the forest disguised as a rough and spreads information about himself. He found what he needed. Before him were the adventurers from the citadel. They were surrounded by a two-horned wolf and a three-legged badger. Also owls and bats. And a huge bear. The hero didn't understand where so many monsters came from. The forest was overcrowded. Hunters and their targets had swapped places. Kaina was concerned that the citadel rarely sent out exploration teams. The hero used his healing skill. The man was surprised by the healing. The guy told him to take the burden on himself. They wanted to know his identity. The man thanked him. The adventurers began to apologize and say that it was their fault. The hero felt he had too much trouble and decided to go home. So he appeared in various places to spread the word that Ruth was heading north, then west, toward the Black Mountains. The spirits would help him deceive Rose and the other golden ranks. That way, he'd throw them off the scent. He made a potion, read and pretended to be a roof. The hero turned to the butler. Jean said he needed a haircut. The man said he couldn't help. The hero was upset by the refusal. Letza asked if he was okay, as he'd suddenly decided to get a haircut, and asked if he needed money. Good hair was usually sold when there was no money. Jean said it wasn't that. He just didn't want to go to the barber, so he figured the butler might be able to do it. He didn't like getting his hair cut in the barber shops at the bathhouse for reasons of hygiene. I told you he has beautiful hair, and cutting it would be a waste. The guy didn't take care of them at all, and it was probably the local water. Although, most likely, their shine really did stand out. It was fashionable among aristocrats to grow their hair long, so the hero could have left it as is. The boy said that washing it was a real pain. He thought about shaving them off. The man said he'd cut his hair later, but he didn't need to become a monk. Jin was surprised that he'd heard his thoughts. They haven't known each other for that long, and he's so insightful, or just easy to read. The butler suggested hiring a servant. But that seemed a strange idea, just to wash and dry his hair. The hero's comrades arrived and greeted him. They have already finished their task. They asked him to bring them a barrel of wine. The hero thought they were noisy. The butler said they had done a great job and asked how Amadeo's squad was doing. The guy replied that those three were worthy of the gold rank title. He was very strong, and the other two complimented him well. Chris said he had to admit he was jealous of their spiritual weapons. He wanted her to love him too someday. The protagonist said it sounded like a lonely man's plea. That was the expression. Simply obtaining a spiritual weapon isn't enough. If one can use it properly, that's called being a beloved spiritual weapon. The usual hangers-on were of little use. They simply wanted to raise their rank for free. Jin thought that he had made a good decision in refusing. It also turns out that 4 heroes have appeared and, apparently, the Empire allows them to do whatever they want. He learned about this from his hangers-on, so they were not to be underestimated. The genie's sister and her friends were not the only heroes. There was someone else. The god said nothing about it. Although, it seemed, they didn't want to interfere with the pact with the ball of light. She hadn't seen those they summoned. He knew nothing of his sister's abilities, other than what the ball had let slip. No matter how strong they were, to gather spirits, heroes usually started with weak magic of prayers and other soft abilities. In this case, those 4 seemed to have ignored the rules. He heard that, in the West, there are fewer and fewer people who are able to see spirits. Ash thought about how no one had warned them. You rarely meet people like that on the spot, but there were even fewer of them there. That's all they were told. The heroes last appeared 300 years ago. The relationships between the heroes and their surroundings have always been full of mysteries. In any case, the risk of overflow occurred several years earlier than the guild predicted. Chris said the scale of magic used in last year's war also exceeded expectations. They told him there was no reason for this, and that was what scared him most. It was as if all the troubles had just happened at once. Dean said they would leave the dark talk behind. He challenged the protagonist to a drinking contest. The boy couldn't understand why he was the one being asked. Dean said that if the hero won, he would take him to the House of Lunar Pleasures, and if he lost, he would reveal one shameful secret. Chris said that in that case he would play too, and if he won, he would take him to heavenly bliss. Jean didn't understand what they were talking about. These were the names of elite brothels. Brothels where you wouldn't be allowed in without a recommendation. The guy said he didn't care about such bets, and asked to be called by his first name. Ash said he wanted to be called by his first name too. He didn't want to talk about brothels in Ash's presence, and it seemed the butler was also uneasy. Ash said that it would be considered rude to walk between 2 brothels of this class. The butler thought that she should stop and wanted her to be pitied. Jean thought they were already drunk. The butler hadn't started playing, but the man, for some reason, had decided to join in. They'd have to leave them in the room upstairs. The man said he didn't expect the hero to be resistant to alcohol. Thanks to the treatment, the guy was only slightly cheerful. The butler said he would clean up and asked to take the ash. The hero said that he would walk her home. Like the cob too. The man said it was an unusual sight. Jean asked there if she could walk on her own. The girl said she was fine. The hero thought that he too should have stayed instead of the butler. There was a wall in front of her. Ash replied that she knew. This proved that she was drunk. The guy was next to her. He thought the only route she had right now was to go straight ahead. Jin asked if everything was okay. The girl turned to the main character. He didn't understand her. She was saying strange things. The guy didn't know how to talk to drunks. Her facial features became softer, and her shoulders seemed more fragile. The look changed. Jin asked her to try not to get drunk in public places in the future, as it was dangerous. Men are used to it, but she could use a hangover cure. The main character asked her how she was feeling. She didn't look so well, and the hero offered to bring her some bread and sausages. The girl said her stomach was a little upset. He said he would use their kitchen. Jin made a syrup from ginger and citrus. It was strong, but sweet enough. The guy said it would help her stomach. She needed to drink a lot of water and rest. Ash thanked him and apologized for causing trouble. The hero said that if all was well, he would go home. The girl stopped him. She said she wanted to take him to the spirit branch, as she had promised. She wanted to repay him for all his experiments. He remembered when they first met. She was going to give him a tour. He didn't have any urgent matters to attend to. They came to an agreement. She was feeling much better today. Azu looked contented and happy. It seemed like everything was okay with him, and the girl's face was the same as always. The hero said that he went there once to buy water for potions. This is the same branch of spirits where Dean's sister spirit was removed from him. Gadam. They came. The spirit branch was usually located in the most prominent place in the square. It seems this was the case in all cities, not just in the Kanuma. There were workrooms and the caretaker's quarters there, and the courtyard was in another place. All water was a branch of the spirits. In fact, it is a branch of the king's branch. The place where the branch was located was called the spirit branch. The hero considered asking her again, but it seemed common knowledge there, so he decided to remain silent. He hadn't yet conducted an in-depth study of the spirit branch. For now, his entire focus was on the spirits themselves and the history of the world. However, the Azir didn't have a king branch, and the Khanum branch was a pseudo-branch. Azir is the name of the country where the Khanum was located. So, she meant to say that the branch was fake. The king's branch is a sacred tree, called the spirit tree, the great spirit tree, and so on. To achieve it, one must overcome all difficulties, reach the sacred tree, called the great spirit tree, and swear an oath that will become the foundation of the country. Good spirits gathered in this branch, and evil ones were driven out. The hero still didn't know much, although when they met, he said so. The spirit tree is smaller than the king's tree, but the effect is the same. Reaching the spirit tree is very difficult, like breaking an oath. Breaking it will result in the loss of the king's tree and the spirit tree. Sormutis, Pasteur, and Marina. These three countries are the only ones to have successfully inherited the king's line. The country where his sister lives and the country where Neruidit is located. He knows nothing about the kingdom of Pasteur. He assumed the fake branch of the Khanum was somehow at work. The fake branch was imbued with magic and used magical stones to create a magical field comfortable for spirits. The branch could be made in a regular temple, but it's not easy. The guy said it sounded like a lot of work. They threw magic stones into the water. He wondered how long they could summon spirits, as magic stones were rare and expensive. He asked if it was possible to summon them using magic alone, without the spirit branch. The girl said that the power of the one who offered the magical force and the element of the magic stone would inevitably affect the spirits that were nearby. The pseudo-branch neutralizes this effect and allows the magic to dissipate into the air. The first spirit appeared. The spirits washed themselves with water, and then used it to create healing potions. At night, a fire was lit instead of a bowl of water. The ashes were used for blacksmithing. They were easier to work with, and the ashes were scattered on the ground to make it more fertile. The boy wanted to see the spirit branch at night. Ash said that if he wanted, they could go there again. Jin thanked her. The hero thought about a date, although now she looked more like a guy. The girl became beautiful when she didn't frown. Everything baked just right. Everything grew well in the garden too. He planted local vegetables, and vegetables from his pantry. He was sad that the pantry vegetables only grew in the mountains. Artificial pollination was too delicate a task for him. The spirit of peas, cabbage, and Italian parsley has arrived. The spirits that have appeared in the fields are interesting, because each vegetable has its own unique character. The guy said onions are bad for dogs. The man said Rich isn't a dog. Ludere appeared unexpectedly. Rich when you were his master. Ludere still loved him. He probably had his own thoughts about the puppy's appearance. The hero was told that it had good vegetables. He met Pal and Ish. Ish was already watering the garden. Where Pal passed, the harvest ripened. With these three, it was like being in a fairy tale. He was curious about what Ludere was doing now. He simply stood and silently looked at the dog. Jin suggested trying the vegetables he'd collected. He understood they could eat a variety of things if they were curious. The guy said he put a little in as a test. He was told that the taste was delicious and fresh. He realized that they liked it, and the ban on vegetables was lifted. Ludre decided to try the onion. The hero said that he was already on his way. He greeted his comrades. He was told he had done a great job. Today he presented the renovated house. The guy said, the guys helped him a lot. The man said they had to paint 2 houses. It took a long time, and they apologized to him. After purchasing the property, he handed over control to a butler. The man will vet all tenants who want to become neighbors. Esh. Assassination attempts since they left the country. She has been a target many times in her own lands. Jen said he would lower the rent and pay market rate for the work, even though he was helping for free. The butler wanted to rent him the house. After the first attack, housing prices rose, which created problems. It's cheaper there because it's dangerous. If he'd chosen a house, he'd have chosen one he could make his forever home. He was lucky he was able to rent when prices were low. The hero assumed that if he buys a house, he is looking for a bride. Letsa said he didn't need a wife yet. Ash got it all wrong. On the ground floor, there is a living room, bathroom, kitchen, and storage room. The man said it was surprising that there was a bathtub there, and that the toilet didn't look like a hole in the floor. The guy thought that a toilet couldn't just be a potty or a hole in the floor. Jin said that if he wanted to live there, he'd have to live up to the standards. He'd have to bathe at least once a day, change his clothes, and remember to disinfect himself once a year. The man said he was very surprised, as the boy had managed to accomplish a lot while they were on the mission. It was thanks to the vault and the spirits. But he couldn't say that, so he replied that it was stronger than it looked. There were 3 rooms on the second floor. The man said it was very soft and not at all like a straw mat. The hero said not to forget to air it out. The girl saw a storage room. The guy told her that it was a sliding door. It opened from the side. Sliding doors can be removed at any time. They weren't very popular in areas where there were security concerns. There were no tenants yet on the 3rd floor, which was roughly the same as the 2nd. The basement was a warehouse, divided into several rooms. But it was locked so that weapons could be stored. The hero suggested lunch. Everyone was really looking forward to it, as the guy was a delicious cook. He was pleased to see his comrades happy. Everything was very tasty. Regular gin is simply chopped, braised, toasted, or grilled, so he's nervous. He wasn't sure if they were saying this because it was delicious or because the flavor was unusual. This time, he used Amiga satake mushrooms in the gratin. They're poisonous, but if cooked well, it's not a problem. They paired perfectly with the creamy sauce. Some mushrooms are deadly poisonous, but the poison can be removed by long cooking. They're a volatile poison. The steam can cause poisoning, so ventilation is essential. The Japanese have a weakness for foods that may be poisonous, but that happens in that world too. They liked the top crust and creamy filling. The soup was quite tasty. The hero wanted to be praised. It was an endless hell, trying to remove the dirt and cleanse himself at the same time. Letsa said he needed a drink, but he only had light wine. He didn't want to lug it back home. It was time for dessert. Dvoretsky said it had an unusual texture, soft and airy at first, then melted in the mouth. Sweets are usually hard because they are easier to store that way. Jin remembered their surprise when he made sponge pancakes. Sweets were rare and mostly consisted of bulky items. Previously, artisans were allowed to make sweets only during special holidays. It was considered a luxury, and ordinary people preferred to bake bread. But even there, locals enjoyed baked goods with the flavor of sweet maple. Elsewhere, there were also master pastry chefs. Maple syrup was apparently a specialty of the walled city, and although expensive, it was readily available. It seems they should have planted sugar maple trees. Well, maybe it's not that simple. Letsa liked salty food, and the butler liked light food. Ash wanted more, but the hero thought she should get better. The girl asked not to touch her brother. She was told not to interfere. For the first time in a long time, the hero decided to visit his family and found himself confronted with this scene. The man told her to consider what would happen to her father and the others if she didn't do as he said. Jin asked the children how they were feeling. The girl said that suddenly a lot of people came and her father talked to them. They were in the barn. While they were talking, her mother snuck in and told them to run away. Then they found her brother and grabbed him. The guy told them to go back to their parents and just keep quiet, no matter what happened. The man told him to start talking. The other said that if he resisted, he would take care of his child. The protagonist thought things were bad. The family was in danger. And a little to the side was the second twin. It would be difficult to deal with them both at once. The man said that no one would have thought that the Wolf King would be such a weakling. The guy thought it looked familiar. The girl said that they were out of luck. Jin didn't understand what it was and why she was so strong. She really did it. He saw it with his own eyes. The man asked to untie him. He dodged in time, so it wasn't as bad as it seemed. The guy had a spare potion. The man apologized for dragging him into this. The hero said it wasn't intentional. They told him his face was terribly pale. This is the second time he has seen someone die. Amidst all the chaos, she easily dealt with her attackers. Her wife and children were fine. Perhaps this was normal in that world, so they took it all in stride. However, she showed surprising determination. He would have simply knocked that guy out. The hero doubted he could defeat her. Perhaps the ideal option would be to put them all to sleep with magic. The whole situation had him flustered and he'd forgotten he could use magic. The man began to respond. N possessed the storage skill. The hero was very surprised. He could have used the storage. The children started saying that with his storage skill, he could fit an entire table inside. It's a rare thing to be able to use storage. The nobles would kidnap him in a heartbeat if they found out. It's really quite convenient. The perfect skill for a merchant. When N was blessed by the spirits and gained the skill of storage, they were in the temple. People immediately found out about it, and they've been chasing them ever since. The situation wasn't easy, and they were already packing up. This meant they would have to leave that place. The hero would be bored. The man said they would go to the Harem and were tired of running. He and his wife were adventurers, and quite famous. The hero thought that this was why the gods had advised him to go to the Harem. There, the aristocracy and the church wielded the least power. In short, Shiva came from a noble family, but they ran away and became adventurers. The hero didn't understand why she agreed. The guy said it was a long story. As former adventurers, they can fend for themselves. They had to quit their jobs 4 years ago when the boy acquired the vaulting skill. The adventurers operated openly, making their whereabouts easy to discover. So, for the past 4 years, they've lived in various remote locations, but they wanted the children to be able to fend for themselves if anything happened to them. They were planning to return to their old jobs. There wasn't much to do there except farming and hunting. The children would soon be 8, and he wanted to broaden their horizons. The hero was sure they were an unusual family of farmers. The man was a wonderful father. Dinosaur asked about the price of the potion. The hero told him not to worry about it. The man said that if he could pay, he would definitely do so. They divided the money into small bags to ensure everyone reached the city safely. If they split it up, the children could hire adventurers to take them to the Kana. It was quite a large sum. They must have been saving it for years. The woman asked him where he got the potion. The man said the genie gave it to him. He apologized and asked her to make something to eat before they left while he cleaned up the street. The hero understood what he was talking about, and it was logical that there was no need to leave any evidence. The woman apologized for what happened and asked the guy if it surprised him. Jen said he was a little surprised by this and said that he would take care of the food and she would be better off helping the children get ready. The hero suggested dividing the food into portions so they could take it with them. He was told that his cooking was beautiful and looked very appetizing. The girl said that she would also learn to cook well. The boy said that at this rate, her fiancé would cook better than her. The man said she wasn't planning on marrying anyone. The hero thought that this was a strange conversation, but the atmosphere was cozy, and he was used to the family. To Kanam. Well, thanks to all the guys, they got another horse, and the boy's skill will come in handy. The hero told the girl that they would meet again. They will settle in the Kanam for a few years, and then perhaps go underground. The boy thought they were going to stay there forever. Now he remembered the god saying something about dungeons. He'd completely forgotten about that. Things didn't fit anymore. The boy's vault was overflowing. The heroine wondered how the vault worked. His repository is the spirit of the squirrel. He placed it behind his cheek. If you look closely, you'll see the man was being examined by a fire dragon spirit. His wife was accompanied by a female ice spirit. These two and the boy had entered into contracts with the spirits. The hero offered to accompany them. They told him not to. He came to them in such a remote place without even a horse. It looked a little suspicious. Jin said he wasn't a roofer, although it did look suspicious. The trip might be a little challenging for kids, but they can definitely handle it. The man had a rough idea of how strong he was, but he didn't want to rely on his strength when he could handle it himself. After all, they are friends. The guy told him to go to the fox's dead end when they got to the Kanam. The man thanked him. When they arrived at the Kanam, the hero made sure they had a delicious meal and a hot bath waiting for them. He was eager to see their faces. For a change of scenery, he was currently in a city located in the southeast. Rumor has it that an ancient archaeological site is located at the highest point of the abandoned city. On his way there, he encountered many monsters. Someone started saying that it had been a long time since they had seen a person. The hero did not understand where the voices were coming from since nothing was visible, but there was definitely someone there. He got into real trouble. There were a large number of woodlice. They ran away, but they didn't know how to hide. The hero wanted to try touching them, but they hurt. He apologized and thought it was better not to bully the weak. The woodlice said that he didn't even know who he was dealing with, and they would eat him. The guy kept touching them. They were the descendants of spirits oppressed by the fire people, who inhabited these bodies to survive. Most likely, they were black spirits who possessed the beetles. The woodlice said they ate the people who came into their territory. They didn't feel a thing. Jin thought about exterminating them. They said he looked like a sage and was different from everyone else. Now, they had nothing to eat. He thought this would be their first meal in a while. The hero asked about their leader. They were not just parts of a single whole, although they acted separately, but they thought as one. Before him stood a huge, shiny beetle. Its body bore no marks, typical of monsters. Its color was completely uniform. Most likely, this is a higher-level monster. In fact, it was intelligence. For the survival of all of them, for a single purpose. The hero apologized and said he should have made the contract. He felt awkward leaving them alone. They had originally been one spirit, but now that the contract had been made, he understood. He regretted their hunger and asked them not to attack humans. The guy said that he doesn't forbid them to defend themselves. If they come to their territory, they can do whatever they want. At the same time, they are not obligated to try to help them. Even if they die individually, as long as there is only one left, they will grow. Jane thought that these monsters were more dangerous than he thought, and they would regenerate if they were not all killed. The woodlice told him that if he saw one of them, he could share his magic with them. The magical power would satisfy their hunger. Their hunger would subside, and they no longer needed to eat anyone. It's thanks to his freedom skill. He can free spirits from such things. The woodlice have decided to eat monsters. They're not as tasty, but when they're hungry, it's a good option. They will continue to grow. They are strong. He was called a savior, since it is now almost impossible to find a house that already has furniture in it. A soft bed is best, and a spacious closet is also great. The butler invited Dean and Chris as new tenants. That was to be expected. Jin said that his friend would soon be bringing his family to Kanam, so he asked him to look after them. The man thought he didn't like people, but it turns out he did have friends. It's not that he didn't like people, he just didn't like the people his sister was friends with. Frankly, most of the people he knew were somehow connected to his sister, so there was no point in denying the accusation of disliking people. He was called a good man. It was just that there were dishonest people who took advantage of others' kindness. As soon as they arrived, he'd be sure to show them around. The third floor could be freed up for them. The hero told them not to worry and said they were a family with children, so they'd want to stay together and make new friends. The current neighborhood was a bit awkward, but it couldn't be helped. 3 people from the gold rank chose to live near the city center. It seems many want to live in safer, more central areas. The monsters had destroyed the city wall nearby, so this wasn't surprising. If necessary, they could stay on the 3rd floor of their house. The hero thanked them and said his house was also free, so there was no need to worry. The butler said that in that case, they would vacate the house behind them. I definitely wanted to say that they would buy it. The guy said there was a rule that people could only buy 2 houses. The man said they had already bought their own home and a rental house, so now he would do it. Dvoretsky had a request for the hero, and he asked him to tell him about it a little later. About a month and a half had passed since the family had left for Kanam. During this time, he had been busy renovating the new house. He had visited the library to read and chatted with Ash and the others. He hoped the man would like their new home. Someone knocked. It was Dino-So. The man said that we needed to go inside and continue the conversation there. The woman told the children to be quiet as they were going to visit someone else's house. Dino-So told him to be careful because it was too suspicious. The guy said their arrival would inevitably become known, and trying to hide it from others would be an even bigger problem. It was one of his houses. The woman asked when he first arrived in the city and what the fake date for their first meeting would be. The guy didn't answer, saying they met last fall or perhaps in the spring. You could say they haven't known him for about a year. The woman told the children that if anyone asked, they'd known the Jin for a long time and couldn't tell anyone the real date. They had already eaten, but if they had known he would be there, they would have. They didn't eat beforehand. The children said that if the hero cooked, they would eat everything. The man said he should join. The hero said he'd just make a batch for one. They left the horses and belongings at the inn for now, but he wanted to sign a year-long lease on the house soon. The guy suggested they take a look at the house next door. He could rent it, but only for a short while, until they found another place. He gave them a key and said they could look while he cooked. That house was his too. The area is located next to a demonic forest, and there have been monsters infiltrating the wall before, so they should take that into account. The hero baked pinsos and small pies. What dishes are easy to make in no time using jarred pickled tomatoes and mozzarella? The man said the house next door was stunning. The woman was simply amazed at how much the house and furniture had improved. The rooms were lovely too. There were 2 beds, and the boy said he'd take the top one. The hero was glad they liked it. The lease stipulated the attic. The girl said her mother had found it. The people living nearby had their own circumstances, so he thought it would be nice to have an emergency exit in case of any unforeseen circumstances. He wanted an emergency exit in the attic. Dvoretsky consulted him about it and he agreed. After some discussion, he sold the house where Letze and the others were staying and bought the house. If there's an escape route, it's better to have another owner on the other side, making it harder to spot. The guy said they would be home today, so he would go get them. The butler apologized for the intrusion. Dinoso was called his shadow wolf. The man said he hadn't heard that name in a long time. They knew each other. Adventurers used to call him that. They met when he was just starting out. The boy said that the memories of him driving them to exhaustion still outweighed the fact that he'd become a simple butler. He thanked her for the order. Getting help abroad was quite difficult back then. The hero hadn't even considered that the butler wasn't always a butler. Before them was the Wolf King. He might have disappeared for a while, but he was a gold-ranked adventurer. The man said he gave himself this name and couldn't remember what his parents had given him. His wife had given him another name, and now he calls himself that. If he was under it, then she must be the same girl. The Duke had indeed attached the spirit. Dinoso knew about Esh and that her father used the spirit to make her more courageous. The man said they had some difficult neighbors, but once they saw the house, it was hard to give it up. The woman said it sounded different because it was hollow. There was also a slight draft coming through the crack. There was no sign of any cracks in the house, so the question arose, where was the wind coming from? The wind was coming from some opening. The house was newly purchased, and the attic hadn't been renovated. There won't be any gaps or drafts. If you close the opening, there'll be no way in or out. The passage should look like a normal wall until you need to pass through it. She was closing up. The man said he was doing this kind of thing in public again. The butler said he had nothing to do with it. The guy was hiding, but his behavior didn't suggest it. The woman said she'd go and check on the children. The hero was asked what he was trying to hide, and from whom. He replied that he was simply worried that his abilities would attract the attention of someone unpleasant. This primarily concerned his sister, but he had already severed ties with her. As long as the other gods were stronger than the light, he would be fine. The girl said he was okay with them knowing about his abilities. She was pleased, but asked if he thought the more people knew, the greater the risk of information leakage. The protagonist said that rumors quickly die down, and until you see something with your own eyes, it doesn't linger in your memory for long. That's his peculiarity. More precisely, it's difficult for people to sustain interest or obsession with him. The girl said he simply knocks out anyone who bothers him. In truth, he simply doesn't like to talk, but he doesn't think he'll be able to convince her back. That's why the genie wasn't discussed in the Merchant Guild. It was odd that the rumors only mentioned the butler, who helped with the medicine making, and the girl herself. The hero said he was aware of his weaknesses, so he stayed away from group activities. Dinoso said he realized from the very beginning that something was wrong with him and that the spirits were absurdly avoiding him. He also saw spirits, just like his wife. The man said she was confident he could take care of himself, but if he'd made a pact with a spirit, he could ask for an escort. As he'd already said, it was strange that he was so strong without a spirit. Spirits were especially fond of adventurers. Some people even lost the ability to see spirits when they abandoned the path of adventure. He'd made a pact with a spirit, but he didn't want to expose it to outside influences just yet. He's very sweet, so he didn't want to be kidnapped by some weirdo or influenced by strange spirits. The butler said that ordinary people couldn't touch spirits. The guy thought that no matter what time of day it was, his spirit was always sweet. Of all the Indians he'd seen, he was the cutest. The hero asked if he wanted to follow him. He'd appreciate his company, but he also didn't want to force him. Jin said that if he felt uncomfortable, they could come back to the matter later. The puppy was adorable. The boy forbade anyone to touch him. Chris was upset that he was being deprived of the opportunity to touch the magnificent creature. Today he was supposed to cook for Dean and the others. He was doing it as a token of gratitude for all the huge quantities of food they'd shared with him the other day. And at the same time, he decided to combine it with introducing Rich to the guys. The butler apologized for the intrusion. The boy said he'd been given a lot of mushrooms, so he decided to invite them over. The butler denied having anything to do with it. The man thought he was to blame. He was also to blame since he had supported him back then, but they couldn't have foreseen this. He was talking about the puppy that was at his feet. Dinoso hoped he hadn't shown it to anyone. The guy said he'd introduced it to Ash and the others. Grandfather was told that there are no puppies that walk silently. He assumed that this spirit was of such a level that even he, who was incapable of seeing spirits, could see it. Rich has an incredibly strong spirit. He probably shouldn't have brought him out in public. The butler said it would have caused a huge stir. It's just that the puppy was always around. Besides, he was fragile and weak at the very beginning. Even though he was still a puppy, he was already considered so strong. He also didn't like crowded places. His comrades began to doubt him. The protagonist said it was his choice to invite them, and he would feel better if I kept an eye on her. Chris was grateful and said he would do everything he could to ensure his trust was not in vain. He'd heard that adventurers were often accompanied by fire spirits. The man had a dragon that followed him around. The hero said that it was his mistake, and began to introduce his comrades to each other. Dinoso was asked if he was a Balmor. He replied that he was. However, they thought he had disappeared into the dungeon. The man said he was returning to the adventurers tomorrow, so they were counting on him. Chris introduced himself and said it was a great honor to meet him. Dean introduced himself as well. Balmor was very famous. Only the incredibly isolated had ever heard of him before. Although the only people who knew him personally were either his relatives or those older than him. To the hero, he was an ordinary man. Just a loving husband to his wife and a father to his children. The genie gave him bread and apologized. The man said that if he didn't want to attract unnecessary attention to himself, then he shouldn't walk around the city with a spirit. Let's say said the guild was expecting turbulent times. He thought someone of his level should return to the dungeon, not the city. She said she wanted to teach her children. The guy said Dean's behavior had become comparable to the tense of a girl desperately in love. It was starting to irritate him. He replied that any man in his place would have shown such interest. He was only a little older than them. He had wonderful children. He intended to educate all three of them. Jin said he didn't know the nickname and simply knew his wife. Dean said his wife was strong and beautiful, and he was lucky. The hero agreed. The girl asked if she was his type. The hero said he was simply jealous of his family. Although they turned out to be far from a peaceful farming family, to him they were still a good family. He didn't exactly envy any of them. It was the warmth of their relationships that made him envious. They'd be fine, but they should be careful not to bother their children. Perhaps the touches were strong and carried strong perfumes, but he somehow doubted that it was normal when you carried him in your arms like an ordinary animal. He said he would try to be more restrained. The hero thanked them for their company. The man said it was nothing, but if he was looking for a blacksmith, the fortress city had the most skilled craftsmen. But someone from Rose's company would most likely be there. She was known as a compassionate healer. The hero said she seemed to be a real pain and a headache. He is thinking of using the magical steel obtained from Ash there. It is processed like ordinary iron. If the furnace is blessed by the fire spirit, the metal becomes stronger, but can be forged just like ordinary iron. The hero said he'd decided to do it all himself. He just happened to have the necessary equipment. The man said he wouldn't even ask where it was. Jane said he smelled something suspicious. After his words, Let's Say also smelled something strange. The boy wanted to add pepper, but he doubted it existed in that world. After his cooking, other food seemed inedible, and even frightening, as one could become accustomed to it. The hero said he could simply replicate his recipes. The other day, the butler made a pizza with asparagus. The man said he was still a long way off, but he'd already started grilling meat at home, whereas before, he'd only tried it outside. Jin said that was a good thing, but he shouldn't forget to eat his vegetables. With his preparations complete, it was time to begin testing. He asked the spirits in the fire for help. The hero had already forged small items like knives, but this was his first time working on a large piece, and he was even afraid he wouldn't be able to handle it alone. But with the help of all the spirits, he was sure to succeed. The tip of the sword was a different color than the rest of the blade. He decided to try it out. He told his spirit animal to stay put. The hero definitely won't be able to use it. Even he understands what he just did. He asked the spirit what they would do, since it was magical steel from Ash. He'll have to take something tasty and go apologize for what he did with the gift. He brought sweets and wine as an apology. The girl doubted he'd done anything deserving of an apology. He said it contained the magical steel he'd given her, but he'd made a mistake with it, and it was now unusable. He wanted to apologize for wasting such a gift. I told you it was his gift, and he was free to use it however he wanted. The butler was surprised that he understood blacksmithing and offered to melt it down and forge it again. Jin said he hadn't thought about it. After all, it was still steel. He wondered if it could be melted down. The butler suggested calling his comrade to demonstrate his defective sword. The hero told him to help himself. These were the same treats he had brought earlier in the apology box. The man said that he was mentally prepared and he could show his sword. Dinosaur asked where he got it from. The guy replied that it was from the storage room. The man told him to keep quiet about it. The butler said that since no one had noticed anything yet, there shouldn't be any further problems. His bag was indeed conspicuous, but he'd cleverly used the guild there. He asked the hero not to melt down the masterpiece. The genie offered the girl the sword. She replied that she didn't have a fire spirit, so it wouldn't suit her. The man said she shouldn't part with the sword so easily. It would be difficult to retrieve even in public, as it was expensive. The blade style resembled the work of Northern Island artisans, who don't have much contact with humans, although they typically cast swords in molds. The hero said he forged it himself from magical steel. And with the help of spirits, it became a true spiritual sword. He also made ordinary knives without the help of spirits. The man said that nothing could be done about it being a spirit sword. The main thing was to keep it out of sight in public and everything would be fine. But that was still unacceptable. Even leaving aside the fact that it was a spirit sword, this method of crafting a sword was simply abnormal. The protagonist said that he did not need a flimsy weapon, and he did not intend to sacrifice quality either in battle or in everyday life. He simply wanted to live comfortably. The butler said his level of culture and understanding far surpassed theirs. The girl said that what was normal for him was bizarre for them. The guy allowed Dean in. He said they were trying to come to an agreement. He brought him some white asparagus. He didn't know what the deal was, but sometimes you just have to take things easy. Dean wanted to try the dish. He thought the sweets cost as much as a house. They contained an incredible amount of vanilla and cocoa, which was already quite valuable, and there was also a sweet strawberry inside. The hero thought it was just an ordinary strawberry. The man said that if he bought the ingredients from outside, he could enjoy them, but if not, he shouldn't show them, and that applies to everything he makes. But a sword is something you trust your life to, so he doesn't mind if it's of the highest quality. He told him to make a new sword, and he would take the old one and say that she got it. It would be great if they all had similar swords, so his would not stand out. The hero said everything he could do. The butler said he had some and didn't have to worry about it. Dean said he didn't have much money right now. Jin thought that wasn't surprising and said he'd make them for the girls then. After all, it was Ash who gave him the magical steel. Then he'd ask the boys. The main character thanked the man for his help. Thanks to him, he finally had a comfortable bed. Letza said the tea was wonderful. He always liked something like that. It wasn't tea, but coffee. Most people didn't like the bitterness. He'd tone it down with milk and sugar, but strong black tea is good in its own way too. The genie offered him a lamp as a thank you. He also offered him a glass, a goblet, or a mug. Since he was already busy blowing glass for the lamp, he decided to create other objects at the same time. The products are made of more durable glass, so they are suitable for everyday use, but it is better not to pour hot drinks into them. The man said he needed to go and bring back the note, as he'd never seen glass that color in his life. The guy said something like that existed there. He bought himself a red glass, and then they agreed the things in the house didn't count. The man said the glass was much cloudier. He suggested keeping them out of sight. Jin said he'd consider that option. He's considering putting them in the kitchen or pantry. Otherwise, it'll be inconvenient to run upstairs for dishes, or they'll just close the shelves with doors so they're out of sight. The man said the Rose people are leaving Kanem. The hero said they've simply gone berserk trying to lure the dinosaur to them. If the break drags on, Amadeo and his gang will be the next to arrive. He barely managed to lure them north, and now, thanks to their talk of Bamai, he senses they'll turn back. The man said he only needs to express a desire to go deeper into the forest, and it will immediately appear in their plans. As for him, it depends on how far the journey is, but he'll probably just be a burden. The hero said he was a wonderful role model. Letze said he'd have to risk his life, so he wouldn't. Jin said they'd go rabbit hunting with the kids or just watch, and asked him not to refuse. The children were given a rigorous training plan to take them underground in 2-3 years, even those who could endure the journey to Khan, which included crossing mountains covered with eternal snow. The hero said that no matter what, the children, while not stronger than him, would be able to achieve it through their resilience. The man said he had far more of a childish side than he'd expected. When you're around him, his mistakes become especially noticeable. Jin greeted everyone. The woman thanked him and said his work was simply impeccable and cut everything like butter. The hero said he misheard. He had forged the kitchen knives for his comrades himself. Moreover, it was the butler's fault that the knives had left his home, and he had presented the knife to the girl as a sign of respect and gratitude. The girl had invited him to join them for dinner, as her husband had caught a deer. The kids hadn't eaten anything like that in a long time. The hero said he relied on her. It had been a long time since he'd had the chance to eat her food. Jin said he was the head of the family and needed to cut the meat. He thanked them for the treat. The delicate, creamy sauce perfectly complemented the venison's flavor. The woman was a skilled cook. The man said his wife was a wonderful cook. The side dish was beans with baked cheese on top. She said it was a little early, but it was the first harvest of the season. The beans may have been a bit small, but they had a beautiful color. The baked goat cheese added a slight bitterness to the taste, but it was still amazing. In such an atmosphere, I really wanted to start a family myself. The girl said that then she would be a wife. The children supported her. Dinosaur said he would never agree to this. Shiva said she still couldn't wrap her head around the idea that Ash had been a girl all along. The hero had been tailoring her clothes all this time. Ash's waist has recently become noticeably thinner, and she's had to have her clothes adjusted to fit. Now that the curse has lifted, her appearance will become more feminine. Although she should first work on her creepy look. The hero said he came because he wanted to join their monster hunt and call his comrades. The man said that in that case, they would look further into the forest. They needed to prepare so that, weather permitting, they could set out in 5 days. His friends had refused to go with them, but he'd still ask again. The guy said they'd see each other in 5 days. They will travel on horseback. Jin said he needed to learn horseback riding. It makes sense that his comrades are artificial riders, but even Chris insists they're new to the universe. The man also mastered horseback riding. An adventurer must be agile. And in that city, the guild, as soon as it sensed the monster invasion, immediately began gathering adventurers. Sometimes, to snag a profitable deal, speed is crucial, including in movement. Before settling there, he himself had traveled through towns and villages, gathering information and making connections. The man was surprised that he had never even sat on a horse at a rental stable. The hero said he'd once ridden a reindeer. Let's say said that didn't count. He might not have saddled a reindeer, but if he could stay on a reindeer, he should be able to ride a horse. The man suggested going to the local stable and finding him a horse. But if necessary, he'd sit behind, presumably to reduce the strain on the horse. It wasn't a good option. Jin said he had a horse in mind. It was a familiar horse that would let him approach. The hero couldn't guarantee it would let him climb on its back, but they had a contract. Perhaps, if it was too much trouble, he should ask a deer or a snow leopard. The boy said that if the horse didn't agree, he'd ask the leopard. The man told him to slow down, as he couldn't keep up. The genie told him not to worry. He'd been told their route would lead through the forest, and that it was familiar territory for the horses, so they wouldn't be left behind. The path led to an abandoned mine. The hero said that if he decided to join them, he'd reward him with a fine bottle of grape liquor. It was the same wine he'd brought as a treat. The guy tried to persuade him. The man said he would only go with him later because he was sure he would do something. He still needs to learn to ride. Once the lineup is confirmed, it's worth booking everyone's horses right away. One can be used for training tomorrow. Plus, if you ride the same horse all the time, it'll be easier to get used to it. The hero said he'd try. There were many different types of horses there, some bred specifically to pull carts or carry loads. Ash and Not decided to help him and join them today. The girl loved horses and knew a lot about them. The butler said that since their route ran through the forest, he thought a warhorse would be best, but they had a rather fierce temperament, and then perhaps they should look for something smaller and calmer. It will be of no use if he can't even saddle a horse, and renting a warhorse will cost a large sum. The man apologized and said that the horse was quite stubborn and was constantly running away, which is why he ended up with them. Ledze said he liked the hero. He was popular with all sorts of creatures. Jin didn't understand why he needed to be a favorite of the wild horse. The man offered to take him for a ride. They'd never ridden the horse before. The boy said he couldn't stay on without support. For some riders, stirrups seemed like a shameful thing.